Can you folks hear us out in the lobby there, in the atrium? TV's on? Okay, great, thank you. Sorry for the delay, folks. Okay, so we're going to reconvene. We had a closed meeting session earlier, so we'll now reconvene, and we'll have our national anthem now. If you're able to stand. Our home and native land, true patriot love, in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land, glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. We would like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa of the Three Fires Confederacy. This meeting is being aired on public television and are streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. To avoid disruptions during meeting, we would appreciate if members of the audience would please turn off or mute your cell phones or personal digital devices. Thank you. Okay. Madam Clerk, we need to rise and report on the issues talked about in our closed meeting. So there's a recommendation that the confidential report from Doug Jones, General Manager of Infrastructure Services, regarding a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land be received. And also we had a confidential verbal report from CAO Ed Brennan, and we had a third item, another potential land acquisition was also discussed by Council. We've given some direction to town staff, and they will proceed as directed. May I have a motion? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, second by Councilor Andrews. All in favor? Thank you. I would like a motion regarding adoptions of the previous council meeting minutes. Councilor Taylor, second by Councilor Post. Any discussion or corrections there at all? All in favor? Thank you. All right, we're going to get into item number 10 on our agenda. This is a presentation by Mr. Andrew Grunda from Watson & Associates regarding water and wastewater rates. Mr. Grunda.
Thank you. The intent of the presentation this evening is to update Town Council on the water sewer rate study that our firm has prepared. The analysis that was undertaken was looking at forecast of the town's water and wastewater rates over the period to 2029, ensuring that it's consistent with the planning outlook for the municipality, consistent with its DC background study. Also looking at the overall needs of the system for water and wastewater, consistent with the municipality's asset management plan principles and the underlying replacement schedule of that infrastructure, so that it's sustaining safe services to its constituents, and also in alignment with the municipality's current draft budget and forecast as well. One of the items that we'll be presenting this evening is looking at an alternative rate structure to the current rate structure that's provided today for water and wastewater. The intent of that alternative rate structure is to better align with the municipality's water conservation initiatives in promoting conservation and the continued use of the services. So the current rate structure today that the municipality has in place is one that we see quite frequently across the province. It comprises two components, that being what's referred to as a monthly base charge, which is a fixed amount that's applied based on the size of the meter to the property, and then a consumptive rate that's also applied. And as you can see, the consumptive rate at the bottom has what's referred to as an increasing block, meaning that for consumption within a specified first block of consumption, there's a defined rate per cubic meter, and then that rate increases with consumption beyond that level, again, in line with promoting conservation. And as you can see on the right-hand side, with the different rates, with the different meter sizes, there is an increasing amount in that first block of consumption. The majority of your water customers that are residential are in that first meter size of 3/4 inch or 5/8 inch. And their first block of consumption would be 50 cubic meters per month. And so to put that in some perspective, that would equate to a residential home consuming about 600 cubic meters a year. Your typical residential customers today are consuming about 174 cubic meters per year. So in essence, that first block is somewhat less meaningful to your overall profile of customers, considering the average demands that they have. So the forecast that we've prepared is in alignment with the methodology that, again, we've used quite extensively across the province since 2002. It looks at defining the full cost of service and what those rates would be relative to the users on the system. And so it starts by looking at the profile of the customers today and what those water demands are. Then proceeding across the top of the illustration, anticipating what the forecasted development in the municipality would be and the increase in that complement, and projecting their demands for water. What is the corresponding increase in capital that would be required? So if you have expansion to the system, what are those costs related to that capital expansion? But more so what we see in defining the costs of service, it's the asset management costs of maintaining your water and wastewater systems that becomes more prevalent. And so looking at both those growth and non-growth related needs provides us with a capital budget forecast, which again is in alignment with the municipality's projections. We're then seeking to understand what are the various sources of funding that will sustain those capital investments to maintain that service over its useful life. And in doing so, those decisions of how those capital costs will be funded and invested in is going to have a direct implication on your operating budget and the amount of revenue you need to recover annually. So those capital decisions combined with the operating budget forecast of the ongoing operations and maintenance then tells us how much the municipality needs to recover annually to support those systems. And then looking at that in the context of the underlying demand or consumption of the system provides us with this rate projection. And so in walking through that illustration, what we first consider is looking at the current profile of customers you have today. How do we expect that to grow over the forecast period to 2029? As you can see, there's currently about 9,800 customers on the municipal water system. That would be expected to grow in alignment with the municipality's DC background study by about 1.5% annually. And so the number of customers on the system by 2029 would total about 11,300. Then, having looked at that profile of customers, what we've then attempted to identify is what do we think the demand for water will be from those customers over time. As we've mentioned, the current average consumption of a residential customer today is about 174 cubic meters a year. Looking back at studies that were prepared in 2009, what we've seen is consistent conservation by those customers over that period of time, declining from about 2% annually to what's being projected today at about 1.4% annual conservation going forward. And so with those conservation considerations taken into account, what's expected is that the overall water consumption would stay relatively constant, growing from about 2.4 million cubic meters today to about 2.42, 2.43 million cubic meters by 2029. So having looked at that anticipated demand and making sure that that's in alignment with the municipality's growth projections, what we're then seeking to understand is what is the available assets of the system and what are the demands of maintaining those with asset management principles over its life cycle. So what this first graph is showing you is annually over its life cycle to 2120, what the total capital cost of replacement would be on the water system. As you see indicated at the top of this illustration, about 14.7 million would be required to be replaced in the 10-year period, or about 1.5 million annually. And to put that in some broader perspective, what you can see indicated by the orange line is that on average over its life cycle, the cost of replacement would be about 2.6 million. So what that indicates to us is that we're looking to identify funding at about 2.6 million, recognizing even though that the spending might be less than that in this 10-year period, so that we're in a sustainable life cycle position over the assets. And that's in alignment with the municipality's philosophy, again, going back to 2009 rate studies. Similarly, when we look at wastewater, what we see is that the needs in the near term would average about 1.7 million annually, compared to the longer term life cycle at about 2.4 million. So with that, then looking more specifically at the 10-year plan, we've looked at the municipality's capital budget and projections for the 10-year period. The bar graph illustrates the amount of capital spending that's anticipated on the water system over that period of time. So you see that totals about $35 million over the 10-year period. The non-growth component of that's about $25 million. The remaining $10 million is what we refer to as growth-related capital, that being infrastructure expansion that would be facilitated and funded by development charges. So when we're looking at then that level of spending, what we're doing is looking at that relative to the available funding in the rate base today, and also how does that align with this longer-term life cycle requirement. And what that generally shows us here is that the municipality's current rate base is doing a fairly good job of recovering the long-term needs of capital infrastructure today, recovering about 2.5 million in light of the longer-term life cycle needs at about 2.6 million. And we see a similar sort of projection in terms of wastewater, and that is that the current level of funding today is generally in alignment with the longer-term life cycle needs at about 2.4 million. And what this indicates is that the spending in the near term will be a bit less than that, which signals the municipality growing reserves over the forecast period to be able to deal with the spikes in capital need replacements beyond the 10 years, again, sustaining longer-term life cycle levels. So the funding plan in terms of how those costs will be paid for, we have inflated those costs, assuming inflation of 2%. The rates are completely sustainable from those own revenue sources, so no additional debt is being identified on the system, no borrowing, interim or otherwise, from the tax base, that they would be fully self-sustaining, and that capital funding would grow from about $4.8 million today combined to the future of about 6.1. The operating costs, again, the operating costs of maintaining and operating the system has been increased with cost inflation over the period. We see that increasing by about $1 million in total over the 10-year period on the water system and about $800,000 on the wastewater system. And so generally what that shows us is that over the forecast to 2029, with inflation, the water system would increase from about 6.7 million to 8.4 million. What's important to note, though, is that today about 62% of those costs are in the form of operating. The residual 38%, or about 2.5 million, is for capital. So that is the cost that you're recovering to sustain those levels of infrastructure investment to provide a sustainable system. What you'll see identified in the rate increases is to focus those rate increases on the base charge. The reason why that increase is being focused on the base charge and not the consumptive component is because right now today, while your capital needs are about $2.5 million a year, that base charge revenue is producing about $1 million a year. And if what we're attempting to do is to get more revenue certainty from the rate base to allow you to maintain those investments in infrastructure so that you have a safe system over its life cycle, we need to increase that level of revenue certainty. So that's why the projected increases are focusing on the base charge to start to rebalance that revenue profile to better align with the capital needs of the system. We see similar projections when we look at the wastewater system today. On the wastewater system, current costs are about $6 million. They would increase to about 7.6 in total by 2029. Today, again, capital costs are about $2.3 million in alignment with those longer-term life cycle needs. Base charges are recovering about $1 million. So in light of those cost projections and looking at the current revenue models today, the first option that we've looked at is maintaining the current rate structure. So as we saw earlier, continuing to maintain the amount of the first block consumption inherent in the current rate structures, and just simply having the rates increase to meet with the increase in costs. The second rate structure, however, looks at adjusting the rate structure for your residential customers. The non-residential customers would be maintained at the current levels today, but for your residential customers to try to promote further conservation in alignment with the municipality's conservation initiatives, we would take that first block, which is established at 50 cubic meters per month, and move that down to 20 cubic meters per month. The reason for doing so is that's going to seek to promote conservation of the system. And it's also going to be a bit more meaningful because right now, about 75% of your customers consume 20 cubic meters or less monthly. But that other 25% that's consuming above that level, this will seek to promote their activity to conserve more, to move more of their consumption into that first block. And so to illustrate what those impacts would be, if you maintain your current rate structure today, and this completely funds the needs as required, what this is showing you is the projected increase in the rates. So the top table shows the current rate today for a typical residential water customer. The base charge is $9 per cubic meter. The first block rate is $2.23 per cubic meter, and the second block, $3 on the water system. As you can see, the consumptive rates stay constant over the forecast period, and that monthly base charge increases at a little less than $1 per month. Similarly, on the wastewater side, the same level roughly of increase in the base charge. And what that would produce to your typical residential customer would be an increase in their water bill of about $20 per year annually over that period of time, or putting that in another way, a little less than $2 a month increase for inflation and all the other costs of the system. So what this indicates to us is the municipality's rate is doing a fairly good job today recovering those costs. However, if the municipality was to look at the other alternative, and so under the second alternative, as I mentioned earlier, we're reducing that first block consumption to try and promote conservation. What this would do in the case of a customer typically consuming 174 cubic meters is actually reduce their bill in 2020. So you can see the bill would reduce by about $20 in 2020 and then increase with general inflationary levels thereafter. And so overall, what that would produce is an overall reduction in that bill by 2029, equivalent to about $30 per year under this alternative compared to the existing one you have today. So in addition to promoting conservation, it would have immediate benefits to your typical residential customers because they're generally consuming under that profile. And so to provide, again, some further balance, we've included a broader municipal survey. This survey is showing a smaller consumer consuming about 120 cubic meters a year, or about 10 cubic meters per month. Their current bill today would be about $722. Under scenario 1, we'd see that bill increase by $15 per year. Under scenario 2, it would decrease by about $9 per year. What we see for this typical customer in your community is that they're fairly well positioned within the county, with only the municipality of Mulmer with water only being at their levels, everyone else being generally higher. When we start to move up that profile, looking at your typical residential customer, as we saw earlier, again, they're benefited by moving to rate structure 2 with that initial reduction, saving them about $19 per year under that second alternative. In this case, we see that the municipality is comparable in terms of its overall customer bill to that in Grand Valley and Shelburne. And then as we start to move to a higher consuming customer, those which we're trying to see promoted to conserve more as we move to rate structure 2, is that they would be better off under the current rate structure with the bill increasing at $15. Under the second alternative, they would see their bill increase by about $40 per year by comparison. And when you compare that to other municipalities, what we see is the municipality is a bit higher in its overall comparison to those municipalities, and generally reflective of the other municipalities having a higher base charge in that respect. And then lastly, when we look at your non-residential customer consuming about 1,200 cubic meters per year, both scenarios are unchanged. They would see roughly about a $46 per year increase in their overall bill in 2020, keeping their same relative position on average with those others that were considered in the comparison. And so that concludes our presentation. Obviously, the intent is to receive any questions and answer those on the report and the alternative rate structure. And then from this evening, us to finalize that report and then bring that back to council on February the 10th for adoption of the rates in 2020. And so if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Grenda, thank you very much for your presentation. I guess I'm just looking through the rates and this is in consultation with Councillor Sherwood. Thank you for your commentary ahead of time. The rates actually go up quite a bit between the two periods, right? There's essentially doubling in a lot of ways when you look at the base rate. Is there any way around this? Like it's almost 100% increase over time. I suppose I don't need to shower before I go to council, but it seems prohibitive as we go. Is there any choices in this?
Yeah, and again, I think sometimes the percentages can be a bit misleading in terms of how they're being provided here. So again, what's important to note is that the bill would be increasing by approximately, just less than $2 a month. It's the focus of how that increase is being provided. So as you can see, the consumptive rates don't change at all over the forecast period. And today, your consumptive revenue accounts for the majority of that overall revenue. What we're seeking to do is still provide the same amount of cost recovery, but just targeting it on the base charge. And because the base charge is relatively low, it looks like a very significant increase, but in the overall grand scheme of things, it's not increasing quite that significantly. What this indicates to us really is it's a good news story, and that is your water and sewer rates are doing a really good job relative to the long-term needs of capital. It's really just a question of how do you optimize that rate structure so that as people continue to conserve, you're not jeopardizing the funding that you need to sustain that infrastructure, right? And that's largely the intent of these full cost rates.
Okay. Councillor Peters. Well, he'll come back.
Sounds good. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Jones. These projections are all at 2029. Is this a 10-year exercise? When would we redo this study for the next iteration?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Peters. The work that was done in terms of putting together capital forecast and such was on a 10-year forecast period. However, we are setting the rates only for a 5-year period. We would be back in likely late 2024 to set the rates from 2025 through 2029.
Thanks.
Councillor Sherwood.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Grenda, thank you very much for your presentation. I do have a couple of concerns about the proposed rates. You allude in your report about a 2%, being within inflation, but again, we get back to these base rate increases, and I'm seeing a 7.3% in each year, collaboratively over 10 years, looking at it being about an 85% increase just in the base, and I know that's a small portion of the bill, but I'm very mindful of the fact that if we're trying to stay within inflation, we've divvied out of that, even though it is only a couple of dollars a month. My second part to this is the drastic reduction recommendation to go from 50 cubic meters to 20. To me, that's very drastic. I know I'm fully in support of water conservation, and I know that's what you're trying to capture here. But I am very, very concerned about the families, a family of 4, that just can't, no matter how much they conserve, reach that 20%, they are then being penalized when they go to the next block for being over 20. I'm just concerned as to why we wouldn't have come with something, say, even halfway, 25 or even 30 cubic meters a month. I figure capturing only 75% of the consumers that use less than 20 isn't enough for me. I worry about the families. I would like to see that ratio a little bit higher, only because we do hear people complaining about our water rates being so high. Some people look at their hydro bill that includes the water, and the water's higher than the hydro. So again, that's my only little problems about this, is that you make comment about it being within inflation, but yet the base rate's going far beyond inflation.
And so just to, again, to clarify, you're correct, the base charges are increasing much higher than inflationary levels, but the consumptive rates are remaining constant. And so right now, when you look at a typical, the revenue that's being generated from your rate structure, what we know is that about 18% of that revenue is coming from the base charge, right? So if we have 18% of the base charge and we're increasing that, even if we're doubling that, overall, it's not as a significant amount of an increase as if we were, say, doubling the consumptive component, right? Because of that share of the overall revenue. The other thing to bear in mind is that, as we talked about earlier, your capital needs of the system, right? So this is the amount of the money you need to sustain that system annually in terms of investing in capital, so that you don't have situations like have occurred in Walkerton and other places. We know your capital investment needs are about 35% annually, right? And so what we're attempting to do is to say, overall, you're recovering well the total revenue. It's where the emphasis of that revenue is coming from that we're trying to improve by increasing the base charge, so that that base charge revenue starts to look more like the capital investment amount, right? So that's the intent, and overall what that produces, because we are looking at multiple components of the rate, is that to a customer that would increase the bill by roughly inflationary levels, recognizing that the majority of the bill is staying constant and unchanged. And then your question with respect to reducing the block to 20 cubic meters a year. So in establishing an increasing block rate, what most municipalities will do is establish that rate, that first block, at levels close to your average residential consumption level. So what we know today is that your typical residential customer is consuming about 14.5 cubic meters a month. We've established that first threshold even higher than that. We've established it at 20 cubic meters per month. And what that would do is have an increase on the consumption to a customer who consumes on average more than 240 cubic meters a year. And based on your current billing data, that's about 25% of your residential base. Just to put that in some perspective. But again, that's something that the municipality can consider, whether they would want to increase that to 30 or leave it unchanged. But I just wanted to provide the rationale of where that came from.
Thank you. So have you done, Your Worship, can I ask further question?
Go ahead.
So have you done a study with municipalities comparable to our size to see that if 20 for the first block, again, I'm just really trying to get over my head about the 20 because I want to capture more than 75% to be able to just pay the first block rate. This is something I may ask further with staff once we get to the staff report. But have you done any type of comparator to see if 20 seems to be realistic per month, or can you say that it wouldn't cause any harm to go up to 30? Yeah.
Again, I think when so maybe to provide some context. So. In the province, the majority of municipalities that are on metered water systems typically have a rate structure similar to yours, that they have a base charge and a consumptive component. About half of those, or sorry, about 2/3 of those municipalities would just have a flat constant rate. So there would not be an increased rate as you stepped over a certain volume profile. It would just be one consumptive rate that's charged to everybody irrespective of how much you consume. The other third of the municipalities that impose these types of charges, about half of those would use this increasing rate block structure. The intent of that is those municipalities that are trying to promote conservation. And where they do that, as I was mentioning earlier, they typically try to establish that first block threshold comparable to their largest consuming base, because what they're attempting to do is to get those people that maybe are not economizing their use to start to consume at more regular levels. And so that's why they would typically do it based on the exhibited residential average consumption. So in doing that here, what we would probably be looking at is maybe establishing that more at 15 cubic meters per month. The current presentation of 20 cubic meters a month is setting that to be a bit more lenient in that respect. And again, attempting to try and take the 25% that today are consuming above that average, incentivize their behavior to start to conserve more and bring them down closer to that 20 or even to the 15, which would be more in line with the majority of your residential customers today. So that's just generally how it's done in other municipalities that we've worked for.
Thank you.
Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Sherwood, I had very similar concerns to yours, so while you were speaking, I pulled up my hydro bill just for a little bit of context. And with having 2 adults, 2 teenagers, and a baby in my house, I haven't used any more than 18 cubic meters of water any month, and I went back about a year. And I have a 14-year-old who I think never gets out of the shower. The one question that I did have for Mr. Jones, though, you spoke a little bit about the water conservation, how we've seen a trend of 1.4% downward. We do have new water meters coming as well, and with any research that you've done on those new smart meters where people do have the capability to monitor more closely, has there been research done to show that people are conserving at an even higher rate once they have that ability to track? Has there been any research done in any municipalities you're aware of? Because will we see that conservation become even greater?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Post, that research still needs to be done by us. That'll be done as part of the water meter replacement program. That said, our expectation is that we will be moving to a smarter type of meter. One of the big benefits of that is we expect that both town staff as well as ratepayers will be alerted more quickly when there is an issue. So hopefully that will allow for conservation. Certainly the ability to track your usage, can certainly inspire people to conserve more. So that is our hope.
I just wanted to make a comment. So for those in the audience here and those listening or watching at home, Orangeville, our water supply is brought to us through wells. So we're tapping into the aquifer here. Many other municipalities in this area are able to get their water out of lakes, and so therefore it's less expensive and essentially unlimited if you're tapping into Georgian Bay or into Lake Ontario. The other thing that I learned in the last year or so being on council and having a tour of our wastewater plant is that we have to clean the water to a higher level than some other municipalities in Ontario, because we're putting the effluent from our sewage treatment plant into essentially a creek, the headwaters of the Credit. And so that effluent leaving our plant is cleaned to a higher level. So we have expenses here that are higher than many other municipalities, and we have to recognize that. And we also have to recognize conservation, and the growth of this town depends on water conservation. So it's, we're going to be talking about some planning issues tonight. We're going to be talking about growth, and all of it's tied to water and sewage treatment supply and capacity. So I just wanted to share that with everybody in this room and listening at home. Any other comments from councillors? All right, Mr. Grunda, thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, we are now moving on to statutory public meetings, and for those, Deputy Mayor, I was going to call him Deputy Chief, but he's no longer Deputy Chief. Deputy Mayor McIntosh will be looking after this part of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just for clarification, the public will be invited to ask questions after the presentations, so if you just hold on to your questions. Council will also get to make comments. Caution council about questions, but no comments, sorry. So, first of all, anyone who speaks and or wants to be notified of further consideration on this topic by council, please complete the notification list on the table. Any information collected will be a matter of public record. So right now, we got a presentation by Town Planning Division staff, Mr. Brandon Ward.
Thank you, Chair McIntosh, and good evening, everyone. So tonight's public meeting is being held per the Planning Act requirements with respect to official plan and sorry. Is that better? Okay, perfect. So again, good evening, everyone. This public meeting is being held per the Planning Act requirements with respect to official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications that were submitted to the town. So the purpose of a public meeting is really to provide an opportunity for the applicant to present their proposal to the public and to members of council, for members of the community to ask questions and submit their comments, and there is no decision being made at tonight's meeting. It really is an information sharing exercise. So the slide in front of you essentially presents a very high-level overview of the applications. They were received in March of last year and then deemed complete in the summer of that year. The proposal is essentially 4 buildings being 6 stories in height that would contain a combined total of roughly 383 apartment units. There's some ground level commercial uses in 2 of those 4 buildings, which I'll get into momentarily, and there's a combination of surface parking and underground parking as well. So here's an image of the subject properties. As you'll see, they're situated north of Hanson Boulevard. The crescent that sort of straddles between the 2 properties is Gibson Court. They are situated to the east of Veterans Way and north of Parkinson Crescent. So the subject lands, as you'll see in this slide in front of you, are predominantly vacant. Surrounding lands include obviously a densely vegetated area to the north and to the west. Existing residential uses to the east, comprised of single detached and some townhome residential units. Lands to the south are vacant as well. They're designated employment area and are actually subject to other planning applications, which you'll hear about as part of another public meeting scheduled for tonight. So here is an excerpt showing the development concept plan. Again, here's the 4 buildings being 6 stories in height. The 2 that are sort of shaded closer to Gibson Court are proposed to be comprised of ground level commercial units, totaling about a little over 2,000 square meters in combined floor area. The buildings outside of those, the other remaining buildings are proposed to be exclusively residential units, again for a combined total of 383 dwelling units. And in the image in front of you, you can see the surface parking situated in behind the buildings, and the underground parking would be proposed below the buildings themselves. So the official plan designates the subject properties as employment area. The lands are also situated within an area that's subject to the Veterans Way South Community Policy Area. And I'll get into a little bit about the history of how this designation and land use framework evolved. Essentially, the Veterans Way Community Policy Area prescribes a balanced community approach for the overall area that you see in front of you that's highlighted in the bold black line. It's to include a composition of employment areas and commercial and residential uses, as well as a community park. The employment area designation permits your traditional employment uses, manufacturing, processing, warehousing, etc. But it also includes some permissions for non-employment uses. The non-employment use permissions are subject to specific limitations or criteria that require further planning approvals of some sort. They generally consist of institutional uses, commercially oriented uses, that's the terminology used in the policy, and residential uses above commercial buildings permitted within the employment area designation in this policy area are to be encouraged above buildings containing commercially oriented uses. The overall policy framework for employment areas states that that they to be protected, that conversion or redesignation of those uses to accommodate non-employment uses is discouraged and is only to be contemplated through the completion of some sort of comprehensive review. And that's consistent with prevailing provincial and county policy framework. So again, the subject designation framework has a bit of a history behind it. It's the product of former landowner applications submitted in the late 90s and early 2000s. Those applications contemplated a redesignation of the entirety of the overall area from what was formerly termed an industrial designation, which has been now reframed as an employment area designation, to redesignate those lands to residential to permit upwards of about 737 new units. Those applications embarked on a pretty lengthy review process that involved an appeal on a non-decision with respect to those applications. The review of the applications were also tied into an official plan review that was ongoing at that time. The official plan review considered the merits behind potentially redesignating those lands, and the conclusions of that review determined that the lands ought to retain their employment area designation. So with the applications being appealed on a non-decision basis, the completion of the official plan review of the day was also appealed by the landowners, and that sort of triggered a very lengthy resolution dialogue to try to resolve the appeals or the applications in question. And essentially the product of that resolution is the current policy framework that we have today. So the proposed amendments for these applications involves adding a site-specific policy to the subject lands that's going to specifically recognize the proposed 383 dwelling units as permitted on the subject properties. And that's because the current policy framework for the Veterans Way policy area prescribes a limit of 400 units for the overall policy area as a whole. The amendment also proposes a little bit of a policy nuance to allow for apartment buildings on lands where a mixed-use building is situated, and that is because the employment area designations contains a policy that states residential uses are permitted above buildings containing commercially oriented uses. So it's really to permit those standalone residential buildings. So similarly, the zoning bylaw proposes to rezone the subject lands to accommodate the proposed development. They're proposing to rezone the lands to a general commercial with special provisions that will not only carry forward the range of permitted general industrial zone permissions, but also will introduce special land use permissions to accommodate the proposed development. And along with that are some specific zone standards that reflect the actual built form being proposed. There's also a holding symbol that would be introduced as part of the rezoning, and that holding symbol, as you may have heard it referred to in other applications, is a means to control the phasing or the receipt of a satisfactory site plan and dispose appropriate servicing allocations to accommodate the development. So since the applications were received and we issued notice of them being deemed complete, we've received a number of comments from the community with respect to just general questions or concerns related to the proposed development, including of which the proposed residential units being somewhat perhaps isolated from major highways, concerns about the adequacy of vehicle parking both on-street and off-street, questions about the area being adequately planned to accommodate the additional residential traffic that would seemingly be introduced by the proposed development, concerns about potential levels of crime and decreased property values being attributed to the proposed development, questions about the schools in the area being able to accommodate the new residential growth, and just general questions about appropriateness and compatibility of the proposed development with its surroundings. As part of their review, of course, the applications are circulated to external agencies and internal departments for review and comment. Certain agencies have expressed either no concerns or identified very typical conditions that they would like to have implemented as part of any further approvals contemplated for these applications. The slide in front of you gets into a little more detail with some of the comments received from certain agencies and departments. I'll just sort of highlight on a couple. The school boards review these applications as they do with any residential proposal with the purposes of confirming student yield anticipated to be generated by the applications. And they also prescribe some very standard warning clauses to be implemented in any offers of purchase and sale agreements for any future new owners coming in, to be aware of the school's student accommodation requirements and potential for there to be temporary arrangements and so forth. Credit Valley Conservation didn't identify any substantial concerns. They did request more information with respect to groundwater impacts, infiltration, et cetera, particularly as it pertains to the proposed underground parking structures. Similarly, our environment division also asked for more information to that effect. County of Dufferin highlighted county policies in their official plan that they would want to see addressed. First and foremost, if the town determines that the applications constitute an employment area conversion, then they want to ensure that their policies with respect to employment areas are addressed. And similarly, with respect to natural features, if the Conservation Authority deems them to be key and natural features of significance, then they would want to ensure that their policies around those features are addressed as well. The Planning Division, we've reviewed these applications. We've identified some concerns with the submission materials that have been presented thus far in terms of the demonstration of the application's adherence to some of the recommendations contained in the 2016 Land Needs Assessment. And as part of that, we've asked for some more information and analysis to present a demonstration as to how the applications meet the policy framework. So again, tonight's public meeting is not a decision-making time. It really is an information sharing exercise, an opportunity to present the proposal. I know the applicant is here. They'll be getting into a little more detail about their proposed development. And we're here, of course, to listen, to hear comments, answer any questions to the best of our ability, and obtain feedback as part of the overall review process. So I won't go into any further detail about that. As the chair noted, there's a sign-in sheet on the podium outside the meeting, so if anybody is here who wants to ensure they're notified of any future consideration of this matter, they should fill in the information sheets or the sign-in sheets. So that concludes my presentation. My information is on the slide if anybody has any questions or wishes to send anything directly to staff. My contact information is on the slide in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Now we're going to hear from a presentation by Mr. Tyler Grenier. Grenier, okay, close. From Bellsfields Incorporated. Thank you.
Thank you, council, staff, members of public. Yes, my name is Tyler Grenier. I'm a land use planner with Bellsfields Inc. We're a planning and design firm in Toronto. And we have been retained by the applicants to provide planning advice through this process, including preparing the planning rationale that you may have seen. I don't want to repeat anything that Brendan went over already. I just thought tonight we could take the opportunity to explain sort of our approach to the site, the considerations we gave in considering the site for residential uses in the form that's before you today, to enlighten you in some of the considerations of the thought process we went through. So obviously you see the sites located on the screen now. They are awkwardly shaped sites. They have been staked by CVC along the rear, adjacent to a woodlot and a wetland. And there's even a walking trail that runs along the edge of that woodland as well. And as a result of those features, it does create two sort of odd-shaped sites, as you can see on the screen, that are also bisected by the extension of Gibson Court. So the sites are approximately 3.1 hectares in size, roughly 1.5 hectares each, a little bit more to the south versus the north. What I wanted to touch on today, though, was the positioning of these sites and the permitted uses under the official plan today. There are uses such as manufacturing, warehousing, fabricating that are permitted on this site that would be located adjacent to woodlot, a natural environmental feature, and low-rise residential to the south. Due to the shape of the sites and their position, we do feel they're somewhat isolated in this community, and we feel that they're not appropriate uses that we want to see on these particular sites that you see today. So just to kind of paint that from a land use perspective, in purple on the screen are the employment area lands, outlined in black are the subject site. There is a larger development that you're going to hear from, I guess after myself this evening down here. And then in green, you can see the open space conservation land use designation immediately abutting the properties that have open space qualities and, as I mentioned earlier, walking trail qualities along the edge of the development. And then in yellow to the southeast here, we have our low-rise residential neighborhood and a land use designation for some general commercial. When we looked at this site, we viewed it as an opportunity to provide compatible land uses in a form that's already contemplated in the Veterans Way Community Plan, and that was the residential uses, provided they meet the condition of being above commercial uses. So the proposal before you tonight largely meets the intent of that by providing 4 residential buildings, 2 of which are above retail, 2 of which are not. The decision by the landowners to proceed without commercial uses below 2 of those buildings was purely based on the amount of retail or commercial uses they thought they could lease out in this type of community with the amount of density that's nearby. But at the same time, providing a significant amount, there's roughly 2,200 square meters, which is not a small amount of commercial space on the site as well, that can provide things like coffee shops or a small convenience store or some form of small office or commercial space that could be used by the community, but also benefit as a local use for those that live across Hanson Boulevard and along Parkinson to walk to and utilize. So that led us to the decision to move forward with an application for residential uses above commercial buildings. An OPA was required for 2 reasons. One is to permit 2 buildings that don't have commercial at grade, and we're still engaging discussions with staff about that. And the other is to increase the amount of units for the Veterans Way community, which ties into a larger discussion about the land needs assessment, which I'll park for the moment. So in front of you here, and Brandon actually did a good job of describing this, so maybe I'll sort of skip over it quickly. But some of the design principles were to frame Hanson Boulevard with additional landscaping, sidewalks, providing the commercial at the corner of Gibson, where most of the foot traffic would be coming up, where there is foot traffic from the neighboring communities, and then having the purely residential uses to the east and to the west. The buildings are about 17.6 meters high, which is a little bit lower than what we typically see for a 6-story building in other communities. But in that sense, has a good relationship with Hanson Boulevard and the separation distance that's provided from these sites to the low-rise residential to the south. The other benefit of being located north of the neighborhood with respect to shadows, because shadows obviously go north and don't go south. So there's another consideration there in providing the 6 stories that we're not going to have that adverse impact on the community. And ultimately, the other thing we're looking to achieve is that range of housing choice in this community. The growth plan, the PPS, talk about providing a range of mix of housing types in order to achieve complete communities. It's one of the goals. This community does have a nice range already in terms of low-rise housing. It does have single attached. It does have townhouses, something that a lot of low-rise communities can't say they have. So it is nice to see that from a planning perspective. But there is an opportunity here to provide another alternative form of housing in the form of an apartment building within the same community that those future residents can benefit from the location of this site. This is a colored rendering showing one of the residential buildings to the far west end of the site. We're not into site plan application yet, so we don't have detailed building materialities yet, but the thinking was of a brick material that would be consistent or match something that's in the neighborhood already. And similarly, this would be the building that's closest to Gibson Court, and it would be mirrored on the other side. And you can see where the additional glazing is provided, which would be where the commercial uses or retail uses would be. So just in closing, I just want to reiterate that the approach to this was a combination of what we feel is appropriate from the site from a land use perspective based on the site's characteristics, its abutting uses, its compatibility with the low-rise residential and the open space, providing the range of housing, which the growth plan and PPS direct, but also considering what the current permitted uses are in the official plan. And we're continuing to have a great conversation with our friends at the planning department in terms of interpretation. And we may be differing opinions today as we sit here before you, but this is part of the public process. This is part of engagement. And we're looking forward to continue that conversation with them moving forward. So that's all for myself.
Thank you, Mr. Grenier. Stick around. Any questions from council? Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If it's all right, I'll address both at once, the planner and the gentleman from Boothfield. So since you're already at the mic there, I'll ask the question for you first. You talked about the type of resident or commercial units that might be available in that commercial space under the two buildings. Could you comment on what size of unit you're talking about and therefore about how many you would imagine between those two buildings?
Good question. I don't think sorry, I cannot see you.
Yeah, that's all right.
I don't think it's been determined as of yet in terms of how it can be broken up. Ultimately, flexibility would be desired, so you could have a variety of unit types and sizes in that place. There is a restriction on, I believe there's a large restriction on the size of a maximum retail unit. I'm looking at Mr. Ward, which may actually exceed the space we have, but as of right now, it hasn't been carved out with specific users in mind, so the sizes haven't been yet determined.
Okay.
Ultimately, it would have to be determined through site plan, though.
Sure. Okay, thanks. And through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Ward, two quick ones. First, I didn't notice Upper Grand on your list of comments. Have you received something from them? I'm assuming they've been contacted.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Peters, we have not received comments from that school board as of date. We did receive their comments for the other application, which you'll hear about tonight. I would anticipate that the comments would be relatively similar and consistent with what we heard with respect to the other application.
Okay, thanks. And last one, also for you, Mr. Ward. You had a slide that talked about the number of units within the policy area, the Veterans Way South policy area, 400. Was that for the entire boundary or just for the sites that we're discussing at the moment?
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Peters, that policy applies to the overall site as a whole, or the overall Veterans Way South community policy area as a whole.
Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Grenier, for your presentation. I just have a few questions, and I think if I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to direct this at Mr. Ward. I don't think this is putting you on the spot in any sort of way, Mr. Ward, so I think the public is very interested to understand the Hanson piece and just how that's going to work, and we add these extra buildings, and sorry, Mr. Jones, if it's to you. I just really think we should offer that commentary for this. And Mr. Chair, if I could, I've got a few others when they come back.
Sure. Again, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Taylor, I'll take a crack at responding to that question. The lands subject to the Hanson Boulevard connection are not a factor or not part of this application or the other applications that you'll hear about tonight. They're subject to applications by another landowner group. That being said, however, the traffic analysis submitted with these applications looked at how this application compares to the original traffic analysis done for the overarching plan of subdivision of which these subject lands are a part of. And that traffic analysis of the day looked at the full completion of Hanson Boulevard. So the analysis that the applicants have come in with as a comparison to that have analyzed the traffic conditions in the scenario that Hansa would be fully built out. So it's something we'll definitely think about as we move forward with this with respect to how these applications are evolving in conjunction with the other applications and the completion of the Hanson Boulevard connection link. And there are certainly options with respect to phasing and timing of approvals to ensure that the approvals or development on these lands proceeds appropriately at a time when that connection is materialized.
Okay, Mr. Chair. I guess with that, I'd like the public to know and just remind them again that council is here to ask questions. We don't get to actually offer our own commentary on the situation. So I think that's important to note. My other question tonight would be just a description about, and it's probably for you, Mr. Grenier, is the rental versus condo piece. It doesn't actually say, and I did follow up with Mr. Ward, but it's not clear, are these for purchase or will they be for affordable housing or rentals? We're having, if I called it a crisis, it's probably too strong of a word, but we're awfully close to a rental crisis in our town, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
No, great question, and it's something I'm asked often in many municipalities when I give presentations for housing developments. As of right now, I understand that the applicants are considering a condo, but it's not written in stone, so there's still some flexibility through discussions. I don't want to speak on their behalf because there's other things to consider from their perspective, and but certainly there's an opportunity for discussion. But I think as of right now, their focus is to provide a condo.
Mr. Chair, I think my other concern is when I drive through that neighborhood, and I don't mean to be rude to the area at all, it's a very nice area. However, there's certain streets in there that are tight in terms of parking to get up and down. It's difficult to get down the road at times, and there's a lot of people in that area already. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on parking, and then conversely, I wonder if Mr. Ward could comment on that once you gave the answer.
Certainly. So with the application, a transportation impact study was filed. It did look at parking that was being proposed on the site. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the justification was based on looking at three other sites of similar scale and size and the parking utilization of those sites, and then applying those to the future development on this site to give an idea or understanding as to what the generated parking requirement would be or need. It's slightly less than the zoning bylaw requirement. This issue of traffic is something that, again, I don't mean speaking as if I hear this all the time, but there is a bit of an issue with if you build it, they will come. But there's also a balance of providing sufficient parking so that we don't have parking spilled onto off-street, or onto the street, I should say, into the neighborhoods. So right now we have one level of underground parking for both halves of the site underneath both buildings, so all four buildings, in addition to surface parking, and I believe there are nearly almost 600 parking spaces between the two sites.
Mr. Chair, may I?
One more.
One more? Through you to Mr. Ward then. So is that, Mr. Ward, is that 1.5 per spot, or is that what the math is? It's on there's 1.5?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Taylor, I believe that's what it equates to. As Mr. Grenier noted, the parking rate they're proposing is perhaps slightly less than the zoning bylaw's parent requirement. So anytime an applicant comes forward with a deviation from the parent standards of the zoning bylaw, particularly with respect to parking, we would want to look at that rationale and understand the justification behind it. And our review, and in doing so in our review, we would determine whether or not that justification is appropriate. And you know, there might be opportunity to look at the range of uses with respect to their corresponding parking requirements that could be accommodated, particularly within the commercial units.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. A couple of points that I wanted to bring forth, and again, with this whole process being a public consultation and opportunity to be educated, just some clarification on the height of the proposed complex. If I was correct in saying so, I thought the figure was something around 17.4 meters. What does that equate? Again, I looked at the rendering, and again, the rendering gives us one perspective. When I started doing some calculation, you know, are we still talking about 8-foot interior floor-to-ceiling height? Is part of this going to be built into the ground
Sorry.
or proposed to be?
Good question, good question. So right now, the heights are about 2.9 meters per floor. So I believe that puts us just above, between 8 and 9 feet, if I'm doing imperial. There's 6 stories. The ground floor retail is at the same height as the residential units above. This is something we see when there's smaller retail proposed sometimes in mixed-use buildings. You may see higher floor-to-floor heights for that ground floor in a more urban environment in the downtown on a major street. Usually in the range of about 4.5 meters or higher, which would have the effect of pushing the metric height of the entire building up. But in this case, it's proposed to be bear with me one moment here. Yeah, 2.94 meters, so just less than 3 meters per floor, including the commercial floor.
Okay. Again, I know Councillor Taylor ended up having some questions were very similar to the ones that I wanted to pose. But Mr. Ward, regarding the amount of traffic, I know that this is still at the preliminary stage, and I was appreciative to hear that there is a process of information that has already been obtained and more to come regarding the concerns within that area. But this is back to, again, Mr. Grenwell, regarding the options, and again, this may also float back to you, Mr. Ward, on the types of commercial usage. Would a medical office also be acceptable in that particular complex under the current process that we have in bylaws?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Andrews, that admittedly is something I would have to look back into the application submission materials.
Okay.
I don't believe there was a full suite of commercial uses, a broad range of commercial uses contemplated as part of the submission. I think it was, again, intended to keep those uses limited largely to what exists right now under the general industrial zone category framework, and also introduce permissions for the residential units.
Okay. Great. Thank you, gentlemen.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
I wanted to ask Mr. Jones, I was reading through some of this documentation, and I wonder if you can give us, everybody in the room here, just a further update on the connection of Hanson East and Hanson West. Mr. Jones?
Certainly, Your Worship. The property that is located currently between the end of Hanson Boulevard, just west of the Blind Line, and the other piece that's accessible off of Veterans Way is owned by Edgewood Valley Developments. They have been in contact with both town staff as well as the Conservation Authority recently, and I know that they are working towards putting forward a draft plan submission that would then be coming to council. Perhaps Mr. Ward has more of an update beyond that, but certainly that development is the piece that needs to move forward for that connection to be made. Once they receive draft plan approval, then it's a matter of them submitting detailed engineering drawings for the town's review. And upon reviewing those drawings and approving those drawings, then they could move ahead with construction. I would suggest that it's reasonable to expect that at following draft plan approval, you would be looking at probably in the order of 18 months before construction commences.
Okay, thank you. I'm done. I'm sorry.
Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to, and I believe it's Mr. Ward, might be you, Mr. Jones, but I'm curious, why is Gibson a court? What are we going to do at the end of that court? Is it for snow removal? It feels like, candidly, there's going to be cars parking there and in the way. Like, it looks like a strange thing to do, but again, I'm just the councillor.
Through the Deputy Mayor to Councillor Taylor, that piece of road was put in there as part of the master planning process of Hanson Boulevard to provide access into the Humber lands, which are to the north. That location is a bit of a land bridge through the open space areas, and eventually when the Humber lands move forward and develop, this would provide a connection from Hanson Boulevard into those lands.
Thank you. Seeing no further comment or questions, we have one more. Councillor Taylor, that's a surprise.
You kicked me out earlier, so I had to keep going out. I had a call from a resident today, Mr. Jones, through you, Mr. Chair, about schools in the area, and specifically the individual felt that a school was planned and promised in that area, and yet we don't have anything. And I know there's talk with them, but when we did that area originally, was there ever plans for a school?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Taylor, I'll take an attempt at answering that first and foremost. I'm not aware of any discussions with respect to a potential school site in the immediate vicinity of these subject lands. As part of our regular ongoing application review process, we have broader discussions with the school boards with respect to their interests of school accommodations, and they, on their end, have a very thorough party dedicated towards identifying future need for schools and look at long-term acquisition of sites in the future to potentially accommodate a new school should the need or demand arise. We have been having those discussions with them. They're certainly looking at some of our future development lands and other applications that may be in a very infancy stage as to the potential opportunity to acquire a school site within those areas.
Any further questions from council? Seeing none, I'll now invite the public to ask questions. When you come up, please state your name.
Good evening. My name is Michael Simon. I'm a resident and I live on Fitzgerald Street in the very close proximity to this proposed development, as well as the other one that I assume we will be hearing a presentation on shortly. So I'll make my comments now, and they really are concerning both. I guess based on some of the questions that Councillor Taylor has been asking, one of the considerations that I would suggest is that any discussion about further development in this area should be tabled and put on hold until the Hanson connection is completed. For me, there is a very serious public safety concern. There is one entry point and one egress point into this development, one and one only. In the event of any emergency, any unforeseen accident, a catastrophic situation, then the residents in this area are really in a pickle. And from my point of view, then we should really put that as issue number one. Issue number two is, what is the vision of this council and what is the vision of the planning department for this community? If I moved here from North York in the young condo corridor, so if I wanted to have a condo development and high density community, I would have stayed there. I came here for the lifestyle and for the closeness, being more close to nature, and for the lower density that Orangeville offered. And so that, I think, needs to be a serious consideration, especially when we are in lands that are on the outskirts of the community. If we're looking at developing a higher density in this community, then I think we need to take a look at where that higher density development is going to take place, and should it be taking place within an area that is on the outskirts, more isolated, and in what is now essentially a single-family developed area. So that to me is also a consideration. And then all the problems that come along with the increased density, and the traffic issue is number one, the safety issue is number two, the parking issue is a big one. Within the development now, we've got cars, as you've indicated, cars crammed all over the place. You know, people need to drive, people need vehicles, all of that sort of thing, but, to have proper planning for that. The other consideration is within this area, with the size of the community that we already have, there is one green space, one park area for all the residents in this community. In these proposals here and the other one to come, I'm not seeing any indication of green space development because on the one hand, we're looking to bring families in, then we need to have the potential for amenities for them. The third consideration, and things have been alluded to tonight, is the infrastructure issues. By essentially doubling into this, the development in this area, we are putting strain on the existing infrastructure, strain on the water supply, strain on the sewage system, and though Orangeville Hydro commented that they didn't have any real concerns, I would have a concern about the capacity of the electrical grid to handle all of this extra development. I've had some experience in the condo communities in Toronto, and I know that with the increased development in condos in Toronto, the electrical grid was having difficulty handling all of that extra capacity. And I would foresee a problem for that here as well. So from my point of view, there are some very strong and serious concerns about the increased density. I mean, one of the issues of the increased density is we can see that the problem that's created with the people coming in this space. We have a very large crowd in this space. It's a small space, and we've got a large crowd here. And I think that this sets before us concerns in the days and the years to come. So those are my concerns. I could go on, but I know there are others that want to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mayor Brown, council members, my name is Robbie Mayer, and I live at 61 Drew Brown. I could throw a rock to this thing with my arm and it's a wet noodle. I, along with many members of the neighborhood, feel it is unfair to those who have invested so much into their family home to have that value depreciated by the close proximity of the 383 apartment units that will no doubt in some form become rental units. This potential project was not part of the municipal plan when Cachet sold these homes to us only a few years ago. The lands, we were told, would be more family homes and a lot of retail components. It isn't fair to sell someone a home projecting one vision and then changing it once you have sold them a home and they have put down roots here. Cachet sold these homes marketing them as executive homes. This neighborhood has an average sale price 18% higher than other homes in Orangeville based on 2019 sales. Cachet and the town of Orangeville has created a desirable family neighborhood where people will pay more to live in, and this proposal threatens that. I had one man message me while I have a bunch of letters of petition signed. While I was getting the petition signed, he told me, "Don't you think we should have a more socially accepted reason for not building the apartments instead of house prices? No one cares that people are complaining about the value of their home." He suggested, environmental, crime, traffic, some things have been touched on already, to base the petition around on. And although I agree with him on those other reasons, I want to point out that this is a very important reason. The members of this neighborhood are not super wealthy individuals. The members of this neighborhood are middle-class, hardworking people that stretch themselves a little bit more to live in this neighborhood so they can raise their kids in a safe and desirable environment. The family home is the largest single investment that a Canadian has, and this proposal would negatively impact the current and future appreciation of the homes in this currently desirable neighborhood. I'm a realtor, so this is something I know a little bit about. I moved to Brampton 2 short years ago in hopes to get away from this sort of density and raise my kids here. I hope, Mayor Brown, you as a fellow realtor can understand the impact of such a proposal on house prices. It's simply poor planning to put 383 apartments besides one of your premium family neighborhoods. This proposal not only negatively affects the investment my neighbors and I have in our homes, but it will negatively impact the enjoyment of the neighborhood, with more traffic than a family neighborhood should have. This leading to more concerns about our children playing in the area. I also understand your agenda for affordable housing, the income from the development levies, and that deals have been made in regards to this land between Orangeville and Cachet. but 383 apartments is simply absurd. If the project is to go forward, concessions to the number of units, the height of the buildings, and that individual ownership must be addressed. He already touched on that. I have with me almost 100 personally signed letters from households in the direct neighborhood of people that couldn't be here but wanted their voice heard, and I only got down Drew Brown. There was not a single house that we knocked on the door that didn't want to sign the letter. The only people that aren't represented here are people that were away or there was a language barrier. This neighborhood clearly does not want it. Council members, your number one responsibility is to protect your community members, and here you have an opportunity to show us we elected the right people to do so. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to speak?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, Council, and members of Council, my name is Michael McBain, and I live at 37 Porter Drive. I face this development and will be in the shade of this development if it's proposed. Orangeville is a great place to live, and this particular area has currently a good mix of single detached townhomes in that area. I acknowledge that most difficult challenges to planning intense community developments has been the protection of living conditions in adjacent neighborhoods, especially preserving the privacy, solar access, and character of adjacent residences. I take exception to the comment that there wouldn't be any shadows, because I know the sun sets right over where these buildings are as I sit on my front porch. Maintaining livability in nearby residential areas is critically important because the success of mixed-use centers is economically and physically dependent on the support of the adjacent neighborhoods. We want economic benefit to the area, but it needs to be measured and responsible and supported by the community. Physical impacts of new multi-story development to adjacent residents can come from two sources: ground-level activities, such as parking and services, infrastructure requirements, and upper-story impacts affecting privacy, sunlight, and visual qualities. This is backing onto a wonderful area of nature and trees, and it's a wonderful mix for our community members to walk their dogs and travel and move around in that area. It's a great place for that. The infrastructure required to support this development must be carefully accounted for. For example, the burden on our water and wastewater systems that we spoke a little bit earlier in this meeting. This development may not leverage the full potential value of this employment area. If we really look at this plan, it's primarily a residential site with a few stores, minor small business, service opportunity type businesses that represent the employment area. These are convenience-based employment type work. We need more than minor service-based employment opportunities in Orangeville and in this community, and in this area to support the many residents of it. We are a strong community and we're actively growing in our knowledge, awareness, and potential opposition to this project. Please consider this neighborhood ecosystem that's thriving currently at all elements and all facets of great Orangeville life. And please consider other reasonable options for this great area of Orangeville. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Steve Van Meer. I live on 6th Ward Law up in the proposed development area. And I want to thank you for having us here this evening. And I don't want to beat the dead horse on the Hanson connection. I don't want to beat the horse on the infrastructure because I think we all know what needs to be done. And I do question why we're looking at developments of this size before we create connectivity between our community. I think we can all agree in the room, all of my neighbors, that we currently live in a landlocked environment. It's difficult for us to get out to go to work. It's difficult for us to get out and live our social lives. It's even more difficult for us to come home and spend time with our loving families. It's becoming more and more difficult for us to go out and enjoy the other experiences that the town of Orangeville has to offer. And I don't understand why we're talking about increasing capacity on residential and minor commercial when we aren't looking at the connectivity issues. And that's just on the roads. Let's talk a little bit about the walkability stores in our community. Any of my neighbors able to walk to the local grocery store? No. Any of my neighborhoods, any of my neighbors have easy access to the elementary schools or the high schools? Anybody have to walk down a dirt trail to get to Shoppers Drug Mart? Yes. And we want to put in high-rise, low-rise buildings? Come on, guys, we got to think about this in a little bit more detail. Let's create a community that's walkable. Let's create a community that we can be proud to call our homes. The other thing that I'd like to take a look at is the allocation of green space going into the existing. We have a wonderful park that's currently on Parkinson. What are we going to be doing to increase the green space and the connectivity between the local parks in the areas? This is all part of creating not only an environment for our families, but also to create a healthy environment for children to grow and multi-generational opportunities. I don't think anybody in the room is against development. Development is important, and it's the cornerstone of a growing community. I think what we're concerned about is, are we taking a responsible or an irresponsible approach to the development as it currently stands? Currently, we're talking about Hanson Boulevard and Gibson. We're taking questions when we haven't even started talking about the other development potentials that we're looking at coming around Parkinson's and then going into the Preston area. These should be addressed as well. This isn't just a small pocket. This is a massive undertaking on a main entrance and egress out of our communities. The other thing that I would like to talk to is the regulations and, I guess, the care and concern from our builders on keeping our communities clean when they're doing these types of developments. I spend a lot of time walking the sidewalks. I spend a lot of time walking the trails. I am so happy at this point that I can walk from point A to point B and not see garbage and building materials absolutely everywhere. The building sites are a mess. We can do better. The builders can do better. Bylaw can do better by enforcing. So these are some of my comments. I'd like to see more connectivity. I'd like to see an approach on bringing this community into the rest of Orangeville before we start talking about bringing more people into the area. The final thing that I would like to comment on as well is the architecture of the proposed buildings. Do they really fit with the current architecture in the neighborhood? To me, they seem very boring, very drab, and that's not the community that you built in that particular location. And that's what drew me to Orangeville when I moved into town 4 years ago. It's a great community. Don't go sideways. Responsible development, but listen to what people are trying to tell you because they do care. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tracy DeMambro, and I'm also a Drew Brown resident who will face this. Before purchasing my home a year and a half ago for nearly $900,000, our real estate agent contacted Cachet regarding the future development of our subdivision. We, as buyers, were told this land would be used for future freestanding detached homes. Our family would not have committed to this purchase price, nor to the $8,000 a year in property tax we are paying to live in a dense commercial area. Unfortunately, again, as it's been mentioned, our subdivision was built with one entrance in and out. This is already lined with townhomes and road parking, making it impossible for two cars to pass safely at the same time. There are also many obstructed views as these are on bends. Adding nearly 390 apartments and thousands of residents will only make things worse, and it is not the vision we were sold a year and a half ago. This leaves most of us feeling completely duped. Please do not turn our beautiful subdivision into a supercenter of people and traffic, as that's not what we were promised when we purchased our family homes. Cachet, in my opinion, has proven they have no idea how to properly lay out a community. They've provided poor construction and have shown poor moral character in general. This is definitely a public safety concern, and in no way should they be rewarded with the opportunity to perpetuate these mistakes in any future development in Orangeville. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Seeing nobody, I'll ask Mr. Grenier, is there anything you would like to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, we took detailed notes tonight. We do appreciate the residents' input. We do have some thinking to do. We have some looking at the site in terms of comments tonight, comments from planning staff, and how to consider how to move forward. I do think it's brave of the residents. I don't think it's easy to come up here and speak in front of a full house, and I know the nervousness of that. So if there are people that didn't speak and want to provide some comments afterwards, I'll hang out in the hall for a few minutes if they want to give sort of one-on-one comments. That's everything.
Thank you very much. So council, we need a motion, I guess, to accept. Okay, we can just adjourn it. This is the next one. Yep. Yeah, moving right on to the next one. We have a presentation by town planning staff. Brandon Watt.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening again, everyone. I won't, I'll try not to be too repetitive with respect to this public meeting in comparison to the other one. However, just so we're clear, again, this is a public meeting that's required to be held in accordance with the Planning Act. This also relates to official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications filed to the town. Can everybody hear me still? Is that okay? Perfect. Okay, so the slide in front of you presents a very high-level summary of some of the statistics of the applications. They were received in August of last year and deemed complete by town staff in October of that year. The proposal is essentially comprised of 140 bungalow townhouse units, 3 apartment buildings being 8 stories in height, containing a combined total of 270 units. As well as the proposal also includes a neighborhood commercial plaza containing a little over 3,000 square meters of total commercial floor space. So the subject lands are just situated to the south of Hanson Boulevard, as you'll see on the slide in front of you. They are immediately adjacent to the east of Veterans Way, and as you'll see, the western loop of Parkinson Crescent sort of bisects the subject lands. They're comprised of 3 separate parcels, all owned by the same applicant. So the aerial photo in front of you shows the existing conditions of the subject lands. As you'll see, they're vacant. Surrounding lands include predominantly densely vegetated areas to the west and to the north. Lands opposite Hanson Boulevard to the north are comprised of the subject lands of which we just heard the previous public meeting for the other applications to the north. Again, we're dealing with the existing residential immediately to the east of the subject lands, and to the south, opposite the Orangeville-Brampton Railway Corridor, we have commercial plaza as well as vacant vegetated lands to the south. So in front of you is a concept plan showing the proposed development going from the southwest corner of Hanson Boulevard and that western loop of Parkinson Crescent. We have the proposed apartment buildings, again, 8 stories in height, containing a combined total of 270 units. To the, I guess on the other side of Parkinson Crescent, we have the commercial shopping plaza, again containing just over 3,000 square meters of total floor area. And predominantly to the south of that, we have the 140 bungalow townhomes. And as you'll see on the concept in front of you, access is to be afforded by a network of internal private roadways. So I won't go over in too much detail the policy framework. It was discussed for the other application public meeting and largely applies to the subject lands in question, which again, they are also designated employment area and situated within the Veterans Way South community policy area. Again, the policy area prescribes an overall planning framework for the lands to basically constitute a balanced community comprised of employment and residential and some commercial uses. I won't get into further detail on the land use permissions. It was discussed in a fair amount of detail as part of the former public meeting. So again, the subject land use planning framework has a bit of a history behind it. I won't go in or regurgitate the history behind that. Again, it originated in the late 90s, early 2000s, and through former landowner application submissions of the day. I went through a very extensive planning process, and the product of that process is essentially the land use policy environment that we have today. So the actual metrics of the proposed amendments are such that they are proposing to redesignate the subject lands in two key areas. One is the town's land use plan, which designates the lands as employment area. They're proposing to redesignate these lands to residential and to neighborhood commercial in a similar manner as the development concept proposal that was previously discussed. The town has a residential density plan, which doesn't apply any residential densities to these lands because they are not designated for residential purposes. However, as part of this amendment, they are seeking to introduce low-density multiple designations as well as a high-density residential designation, again, reflective of the proposed development. So similarly, the zoning bylaw proposes to rezone the subject lands in a manner that's consistent with the proposed development concept. They are proposing to rezone the subject lands to residential fifth density, which is amidst the series of residential zone categories that would permit townhouse dwelling units, which is consistent with what is being proposed for these lands. The southwest corner of the subject lands are proposed to be designated, or rezoned, to a multiple residential high-density zone category that would permit the apartment dwelling units, and the lands opposite to that are proposed to be rezoned neighborhood commercial. And as part of that, there are some proposed site-specific provisions that are proposed to be introduced as part of the rezoning of these lands that would be reflective of some of the attributes of the proposed development concept. And similar to what we heard with the other applications heard tonight at an earlier public meeting, a holding symbol would be imposed on the subject lands as part of any rezoning process to basically control or regulate the receipt of a satisfactory site plan, control the disposition of servicing allocation, and also could be used as a tool to control or determine appropriate phasing for the subject lands. So public comments received, we've received several since the applications, the notice for the applications was published in the fall of last year. The comments are somewhat similar to some of the comments we heard as part of the previous public meeting. I'll just go through them very briefly. Again, we had concerns about access to the overall neighborhood as a whole at this point, concerns about vehicle parking, questions about the area being planned to accommodate this proposed development, especially with respect to traffic, questions about school accommodations in the area and being able to accommodate the proposed residential growth being introduced by this development, questions about the density and appropriateness and compatibility of the proposal with respect to its surroundings. So some of these comments, again, are perhaps somewhat similar to what we heard as part of the previous applications. I'll just touch on them very briefly if I could. Both school boards commented very similarly with respect to confirming the student yield they anticipate that will be generated by this development, and provided a series of warning clauses or conditions that they would like to see imposed as part of any future approvals. And those conditions would relate to the imposition of warning clauses in any future purchases or offers of purchase and sale agreements to alert purchasers about their student accommodation requirements and potential needs for interim accommodations, et cetera. Again, Dufferin County highlighted county policies that they would like to see addressed should the town interpret these applications to constitute a conversion of employment lands in the context of provincial and county policy framework. They had also highlighted the need to address their policies with respect to woodland features in the area if consultation with Credit Valley Conservation determines that these features are deemed to be significant. Our Economic Development Division provided some fairly extensive comments with respect to these applications. They highlighted the importance of the town protecting its employment areas from redesignation to non-employment uses, and in conjunction with that highlighted an apparent current lack of availability of employment land supply in the town, and just emphasized the importance of maintaining land availability to attract a diverse range of employment uses to, well, I guess first and foremost, perhaps reduce the trend of outbound commuting residents, and also to try to share the burden of the predominancy of a residentially supported tax base. Our planning division has evaluated this, and we've reviewed the submissions and the demonstrations as to how the applications align with the policy framework. We have identified some questions and concerns that we would like further information in order to address, and there will be certainly further discussions with the applicant to understand what is required in order to, I guess, more comprehensively evaluate the applications. So just in summary, again, tonight's meeting, of course, we're not here to make a decision or contemplate a decision. It's really to receive information, allow the applicant to present their proposal in a little more detail. I know they are here tonight and will follow my presentation with a perhaps more in-depth overview of their proposal and their submission process and so forth. We're here to hear the comments received, answer any questions to the extent we can, and ultimately, as we go forward, we'll be taking the comments received into consideration as part of our overall evaluation. So that concludes my presentation. My information is on the slide in front of you, should anybody wish to submit comments directly, and perhaps be hesitant to do so at tonight's meeting. And also, again, I just want to remind everybody that we have a sign-in sheet outside in the podium, outside council chambers. If anyone is interested in receiving notification of any future consideration of these applications, I would encourage them to fill out their information on that form. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Before we go any further, we're going to take a quick 5-minute health break. Thank you. I'd like to call on a Mr. Dave Hannon from, I might get this wrong, Salinka Priamo? I was close. Thank you.
Good evening, members of council. My name's Dave Hannum. I work for a planning consultancy called Zelenka Priamo. We're a London-based planning consultancy. We're the planning consultants for Sarah Properties for this particular application. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the nuances of the various developments in this area, so I'm not going to regurgitate it all. I'll just provide sort of a quick summary with a few pictures as well. Obviously this site is considerably larger than the one that we had previously talked about. It's 9.3 hectares, but 23 acres of vacant and undeveloped land. It comprises the fifth and final stage of the larger Mono Meadows subdivision. Sarah Properties Limited is the sole owner of these lands. They were involved with the previous phases in association with Devonley Homes in terms of the creation of those phases. As you know, you'll understand the surrounding land uses. There's a mixture of commercial, but predominantly residential, particularly to the east. So I just wanted to talk through our proposed concept plan. First of all, there is a correction with regards to the staff report that I wanted to highlight as well, and which I'll get to. But this is a 3D rendering of the site as viewed from the south. We acknowledge, and staff acknowledge, that this site plan is conceptual, and it will be refined through the review process. The majority of the residential of the lands, development lands, are residential, with the predominantly bungalow townhouses. What I'd like to correct is that there's actually 104 bungalow townhouses proposed, not 140 as mentioned in the staff report. So the majority are bungalow townhouses. I'll show you a little graphic of that later in the presentation. Up in the northwest corner, which is the top left-hand corner of the graphic, we have 3 apartment buildings comprising 270 apartments. Now those will be a mixture of rental and purchased properties. So the exact number of rental to purchase is to be defined, but it will be significant in that respect. These buildings will also be designed and targeted for seniors as well. In association with the apartment buildings, there will be underground parking. There's also surface parking and visitor parking provided, and an area of outdoor amenity space behind one of the buildings to the rear as well. The narrow parcel, it's not shown on this graphic, there's a narrow parcel also owned by Sarah Properties across on the northern side of Hanson Boulevard, which we propose to retain as open space. Access will be provided off Parkinson through a series of private roads, all designed to town standards and regulations. The overall residential density of the development properties will be approximately 48 dwellings per hectare. In the northeast corner, you'll note that there's approximately 34,000 square feet of commercial. We foresee this to be a multi-tenanted, low-rise commercial building. In our conceptual drawings, we've shown this as 3 units, 2 larger units, and then 1 smaller end-cap unit. But the world's our oyster with regards to how this will work. There's a significant range of permitted uses on these lands. So we're looking to designate them neighbourhood commercial, so it would encapsulate uses such as retail or small office, personal service, maybe restaurants, those sorts of uses. We propose that the development will be serviced through municipal services. So this is just a view from the top of Parkinson looking south with the apartment buildings. What I'd like to point out is that the delivery of this development will provide a full urban cross-section, so there will be sidewalks provided throughout the development, as well as opportunities for landscape enhancements along the boulevard. This is an example of the townhouse bungalows. The landowner met with representatives from members of staff and listened to local residents, and he wants to provide a product that he feels will fit within the context of the existing established residential community, a high-quality development. He's also heard the concerns about the provisions for spillover of vehicle parking. So these units will be double-car garages with parking within the aprons, roughly 40-foot frontages with regards to that low rise as well. So I just want to touch on a few conclusions, and then I'm happy to take any questions. I just wanted to point out that, and it's been made aware through staff presentations, that there are non-employment permissions, including commercial and residential uses currently existing on the subject lands. And I want to stress that these aren't our policies. These are policies that were established in the town's official plan through an OMB process. So it's something that we're not proposing. These are policies that are in place now. With regards to those existing permissions, what effectively we're doing is we're splitting the mixed-use building format into a format that we feel is more compatible with the existing surrounding neighbourhood. So we're taking the permitted commercial and residential and providing them in a more contemporary mixed format. We've provided for a number of years now, our messaging through to town staff has been that given these permissions, it should be anticipated that given that they represent the highest and best use on these lands in our eyes, that any proposals that come forward on the subject lands as represented through this development would make use of those commercial and residential uses rather than the traditional employment uses. As per the second bullet point, the subject lands are located within the designated settlement area and which is the focus of new growth and development. The proposed development will create new housing and commercial uses. As I said, there'll be a mix of rental land, purchase properties, which will help to promote the vitality of the neighbourhood. It's our understanding that Orangeville is in the need for additional residential allocation, particularly rental accommodation. The proposal, as I mentioned, would also provide for a range of enhanced commercial opportunities and services for local residents, and also would generate for the town a significant amount of development charge funds as well. So I just wanted to point out that the applicant and the owner has made considerable efforts in terms of its design to try and be respectful of the surrounding properties, as well as provide housing forms that we were advised would be needed in this area. The application is supported by a number of technical reports as well, including servicing reports that address the capacity of the development, the traffic impact study, which is supportive of the development, and also a retail study to ensure that this level of commercial that we're proposing doesn't have any adverse effect on Orangeville downtown. So I also want to stress that to residents that this is not their only opportunity to have a look at any future development plans coming through on this site. Or these are effectively conceptual applications. The detailed design in terms of fencing and lighting and landscaping and all that would be dealt with through the future site plan process. So we're hopeful of getting a positive endorsement from the residents with regards to our proposal. We understand that there's a bit of heavy lifting to do with regards to addressing staff's comments and any comments that come from the public tonight. and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hannan. Any questions from council for planning or Mr. Hannan? Seeing none, I'll invite the public to ask any questions. Oh, sorry. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate very much your presentation today, and I was pleased to hear amongst your initial presentation, which is not what I got from the drawing, so I'm glad that you came in today, that you've addressed a number of mixed-use homes that are needed in our community. I especially like to see the bungalow townhouse styles. Those are fantastic for seniors, and I think that would address some definite need. With that being said, though, I think that I'm assuming you were here from the earlier comments, and you probably heard some of the previous comments from the previous development. And I think that we still have the issue where we might be putting the cart before the horse a little bit. There's some issues that need to be dealt with first with regards to traffic in that area and making sure that Hanson is open. We've got a significant island of a community right now who only has one access in. And while I think that this development could be extremely good for the neighborhood, looking at how you've got the mixed use, I really think we have to be cautious of putting the cart before the horse.
Any other questions from council? Seeing none, I invite the public to ask any questions. Please state your name.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, councillors, my name is Bernie Lynch. One of my main questions concerned with this, of course, is the Hanson Boulevard access. I maintain if a guy with a snow shovel and a fork truck clear that blockage off at the end of Hanson and you would connect to College Way. The road is paved right through to it. I don't know why somebody hasn't done it. Seems odd to me. However, I live on Passmore, so I try to avoid it. I'm looking at the number of people that are going in here, and I'm looking at over 2,200 people into the two applications, possibly 700 children. And I've never heard anybody mention daycare yet. My guess is if we've got couples moving in there, chances are there'll be children. They'll start somewhere, and they probably need daycare. And that's where some of these little commercial locations should work or function. I maintain that they ought not to have as many residential installations in the place. I still think on the first one, the first application, if we had a double-story office structure in there that would handle all of the facilities for healthcare, different units for daycare, and possibly offices for technical aspects. We need people moving in there who are working in high tech. And there are people in this town who work in technical. And they could use that space over there once the Hanson Road is completed through. Now I want to go and talk about the thing called, what is it here? Development charges. The last development charges that I could find on the town record was 2014. And the charges charged for development in 2014 don't work today. I'm curious to know, is there a new schedule of development charges since 2014? Maybe Mr. Ward has an answer to that.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair, we do have a new development charges bylaw. It was passed in the fall of last year.
I couldn't find it. I'm not good at finding things, I guess, and it wasn't there. So I'm just suggesting that the development charges ought to cover sufficient funds that would take care of a large portion of that bridge we need on the Hanson Road there. A little bridge. And somebody told me it was going to cost $2.5 million to put it in. Chances are it'll be more than that. I don't have the numbers on it. But if the developmental charges are sufficient on the installation of these new, following the amendments, then we should be able to put that bridge in. But until that happens, let's connect Hanson Way to College Way, Hanson Boulevard to College Way. That will get them through there for giving another access point. In point of fact, moving from the EMS location on Blind Road, it takes normal driving. I don't have a siren and I wasn't flashing my lights. It takes 7 minutes to get to Porter from that EMS station. If Hanson Road went through at College Way and connected on the other end, it would take 2 minutes, 3 at the outside. That's one important thing. Now, the fire station coming from Dawson Road is going to be the same either way. I can't figure any improvement in that. Now they're talking about getting the schools in there. If Dufferin Board of Education is not aware of how many kids are going to be there. And it always amuses me that the Board of Education in various locations around the province are surprised when children show up. Beats the dickens out of me. You put two people together, especially they're a man and a woman, there will be children. It's God's law. Anyhow, getting away from that, I still think that the plans for residential density is a bit high for that immediate area. It needs to be adjusted to a point where, yes, we need more taxpayers, but they shouldn't all be at $8,000 a year. And I'm concerned about this particular development that was just presented now. There are some commercial buildings right on Parkinson, a little strip, like a strip mall put in there. The backs of those buildings, I think, go onto a little parkland or will be a parkette. And I think that needs to be considered for its application. This is awkward when you have, let's say you have a splash pad in there, you make it available, slides and playground for children, which is not out there yet that I know of. I haven't seen any. If this application is put in there, then the additional buildings that are added need to be concerned with the number of children that would be running around and walking around. I'm way beyond that children consideration age, but I was born beside a mill pond and I had everything at my availability. I'll leave you. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jocelyn Small, and I thank all of you for being here this evening to receive our comments. I didn't prepare anything in advance. I came for the first time to Town Council. Thank you to Councillor Taylor for putting it on social media. It helps us to stay informed. I appreciate that. I appreciate the comments from the Economic Development Department of Community Services about the current lack of available employment, that everything's predominantly residential based. I guess one of the questions that I have is, what are we doing about that? Because are we doing anything to incentivize employment use, or is this the path of least resistance? Is it just easier to continue to develop our land without any sort of thought for the fact that maybe these people wouldn't want to commute? I moved up here from Brampton. I have nothing against Brampton. I still work there every day. I commute every day. It means that there are 2 hours of my day that is spent away from this town. That doesn't mean that I don't support the local businesses that are here. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't love to work here, but it's just not viable. It's not viable for me to be employed in the town that I live in, which is very sad and unfortunate, but that was the reality of what I did when I moved up here. I wanted a different type of life for my family. I wanted a different type of life for my children, if I'm so lucky to have them at some point. And this doesn't seem like it for me, to the point that everybody's been bringing up, that putting townhomes beside a park, that putting commercial uses on streets that we're trying to walk dogs and have kids play on, that in terms of seniors, that how are we getting them there? I mean, if there's no consideration for transit and connectivity, then what are they doing there? Are they just isolated? There's been comments from a number of different agencies, but healthcare wasn't one of them. Has anybody spoke to the hospital? Are they going to be able to accommodate this? That's a crisis that I know that we're all familiar with in Ontario, but specifically in Brampton, that there's a healthcare crisis. Is this going to be next? That when Brampton started building out their town not so many years ago, I imagine these were probably some of the considerations, and now they're in a position where they're also looking at employment issues, and they're the 9th largest city in Canada. So is Orangeville going to be next? Is it going to be where people escape to? So I don't know if anybody can actually answer my question, but I think it's really, if this is the path of least resistance, it's not the path that any of us want. So.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth, and Elizabeth Anderson, and I'm on Porter Drive as well. One of the questions I do have is about schooling. We're bringing all these people here, and I lived in Shelburne before, and one of the biggest problems Shelburne had is there were so many kids, they had nowhere to put them. They didn't know where they were going to have all these kids. What school were they going to go to? What school are all these people going to go to? have we actually really sit down and thought? I mean, we're bringing these townhomes, we're bringing these apartment buildings, they are going to bring kids. So where are they going to go to school? I have 3 kids of my own, and like they don't have schools anywhere near. Like they have, like there's no transportation to go anywhere nearby where it's one way in and one way out. To go to work sometimes, there's so much traffic in order to just turn on, to go on, to get out of the community. So I just don't understand where all this congestion, like what we're going to do with all this congestion, and I think that's something we need to think about. I love that area, and when I moved there, before I moved there, we drove by that area so many times, and I said I wanted to live in that area. So we made, even though the taxes were high, we made the decision, me and my husband and my family, to move to that area because we love that area. And if I knew that we would be doing something like this now, I wouldn't have moved there, because I wanted a place where my kids could grow, where they can have a little bit more freedom, where it's not so congested. This is why we don't live in the city, because we didn't want to have that kind of city life where there's just so much, nothing for the kids to do. There is no parks for the kids to play in. There's a basketball net, but that's about it. But there's nothing else for the kids really to do out there. And I just think we need to really think about the families as well. Thank you.
Sorry, guys, it's me again, Steve Van Meer, Wardlaw Avenue. I got a couple of questions. The first one is that we've got 2 proposed developments that we're currently talking about this evening. We've got 2 consultants, one from the City of Toronto, one from the City of London. Has our development process thought to bring these consultants together to create an environment that's going to be a little bit more aesthetic? And are we judging them based on the entire, or are we looking at them separately?
Mr. Ward?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the resident, applications are reviewed independently, but they're also reviewed cumulatively in terms of how they interact with one another from an impact standpoint, from a servicing standpoint, from a traffic standpoint, all those things. In particular, with respect to the planning policy, it is something we are looking at very carefully with respect to the applicant's demonstration of how their proposal aligns with the policy framework. We will be looking at that collectively.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. I think this evening shows that there's a great opportunity for collaboration between the developers and the consultants. I think there's some room to move. The second question that I would like to bring to the attention for this evening, and I forgot earlier, is let's talk a little bit about transit. Why do we have no transit in our neighborhood? Let's talk once again about connectivity. Can anybody explain? I understand it has to do with the Hanson bypass. We got 2 buses. I've never seen them in my neighborhood.
Mr. Jones, would you care to tackle that one?
Certainly, Mr. Deputy Mayor. We do have a transit system. We are currently moving through a process with a transit task force to make some decisions with respect to the future of the system. Without rehashing what we've been through on transit over the last several years, we're trying to get a downtown transfer point that will allow us to implement a more efficient route system. There is currently a fair bit of the west end of the town, not just the area where you folks live, but also in the southwest, that doesn't currently have transit system, and we want to extend our routes into those areas. The Transit Task Force will be bringing recommendations back to Council in March, and pending Council approval of those recommendations, hopefully we will be moving forward, and hopefully transit can be extended into the neighborhoods that currently do not have it.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. Hopefully we can bring transit into the neighborhood, and before we bring in all these new people, let's let the current people use it and make sure we get it right. The third thing that I'd like to talk to, and this may be a little bit premature, but I understand that there's going to be a push to open up the end of the road from Preston, going into the Avalon Senior Center, I believe. Have we taken a look at the transit impact on that? Am I misinformed on that, or is that happening?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there is a parcel of property that is owned by the Avalon that is off of the end of Preston. It was identified as a piece of property that they were looking to build a long-term care facility on. The connection between the existing Avalon property and that property is problematic because there's a wetland area in between that the Conservation Authority would not allow them to traverse. So if and when that does develop, the access into that would be off of the end of Preston, yes.
So that will also impact the current traffic issues that not only we're experiencing now, but we anticipate we're going to experience in the future. Seems
Mr.
like we've
Jones.
got a little bit more planning to do.
Mr. Jones.
You're absolutely right. Anytime a development comes forward, they need to take a look at what the impact is going to be on our existing infrastructure. That includes water, that includes wastewater, that includes traffic. So if and when the Avalon moves forward, just like the applicants who are here tonight, they'll be required to bring forward a traffic study that will identify what the increases in traffic will be and identify whether it's appropriate on those roads and if there are changes or upgrades on those roads that are required. And those would be the responsibility of the developer to implement.
Can you speak to those development process or the plans are currently in works?
I'm not aware of anything that is imminent.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sorry. Round two. Michael Simon again, 5 Fitzgerald Street. No comment has been made as yet on the height of these proposed buildings, the 8 stories. It's a bit of a concern. I think that is going to put us in Tuscany, in Italy. There's a town called San Gimignano, and they got into the scenario in their day that they began building buildings, and one, to show how great they were, they built one a little bit higher and then a little bit higher. So we're talking about 6-story buildings, and now we're talking about 8-story buildings. I mean, I think in terms of the overall plan and design and the fit in this community in terms of the height of buildings, that's a concern that hasn't been mentioned yet. I just wanted to bring it out.
Thank you for hearing me out. My name is Paul Clarkson. I live on Hutchison Court. Looking at the proposals here today, I often hear that we need more employment opportunities here in Orangeville and that people need to be able to get a better wage for their life. Looking at the 2 lands specifically, that's exactly what they were designated for, and that's exactly now they're talking about putting in small retail shops in the bottom and not actual job offers. When you look at the actual use of that land and you look at these people that will be running convenience stores, earning a wage of what, probably minimum wage in that situation, it's pretty easy to figure out why we need to create more rental spaces versus properties that people can own. Because we're not fixing the actual problem in this town, which is that there needs to be more opportunities for employment. So, thank you.
Any more comments from the public?
Hi, my name's Steve Mole, and I live on 2 Preston Drive. I live adjacent to the actual park that's there. I agree with pretty much everything that's been said here tonight from the residents who actually came out, and thank you one and all for supporting it. Thank you all for listening. The thing I really want to speak about that I guess worries me the most is the amount of apartment buildings here. Mr. Ward, you were saying that you look at them individually and collectively, okay? If you take a point in Parkinson Park, which is the only park that looks like it's going to be there for all this development, and you take it out 750 meters and draw a circle, you're building 8 apartments there. 7 at 8 stories, 1 at 6. It's too much. It does not sit in harmony with the rest of the development in the area. And I really want to ask you to take a long, hard look at this. One gentleman this evening mentioned that he didn't think that anybody was against development, and I agree with him. We know it's going to be developed. The thing it does need to do is represent Orangeville as it is as a town, and it also needs to sit in harmony with the existing infrastructure that's there and the existing housing. So I really ask you to take a long, hard look at that. I honestly, I don't think it's viable in its present state. If you choose to go ahead with it in its present state, I think we'll all come to regret it. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Thomas, and I live on 11 Drew Brown Boulevard in this community as well. I didn't want to, I think there's been a lot of great points made here today, and I didn't want to, as we said before, beat them like a dead horse, but I did want to bring up the main fact of quality of life. My wife and I moved up here 2 years ago because we were extremely attracted to the green space, the safety, the chance to start a family in such a beautiful town. We wanted to move here for years, and it was a real dream for us. I think it's why a lot of people are coming to this town, because it's of all the amenities that it does have. We're just scared. We're scared of these two proposals we've heard today to bring in 2,200 people and maybe 3,500 cars to our community. The insane population density and issues that this might bring for our community with safety, traffic, congestion, crime, services, environmental issues, transit, healthcare, education, all the things that we've heard here today. I'm no urban planner, but until Hanson is connected, which sounds like it could be years, and our community is extrapolated to the rest of the city connectivity-wise, which we heard earlier today, the town in which we live is not ready for this. Another speaker said today, putting the cart before the horse. I don't even think the cart has been built yet. And the town might be ready for this years down the road, but the time isn't now. It's about quality of life, and we would have not come to live in this town if it wasn't for the wonderful quality of life which may be in jeopardy to these proposals. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from the public? Seeing none, I'll pass it over to Mr. Dave Hannon again. Do you have any comments on the submissions by the public?
Just before a few closing remarks, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that a couple of the residents said, particularly with regards to proposed uses. With regards to employment generating uses, the designation that we're looking to propose for the commercial would include uses such as daycares and offices, and although they're not traditional general industrial uses, which in planning terms is what's defined as employment generating uses, there will be some generation of employment through that commercial. What I just want to stress is that these residential and commercial uses that we're proposing on these lands, they are permitted on the subject lands, and they have been in place since 2007, albeit contemplated in a different building format and on lands that are identified as employment area. I just wanted to re-emphasize that the owner has making considerable efforts to design the project to be as compatible with the form of housing that we feel is needed in this area, and also with the established and emerging residential neighbourhood. From a compatibility point of view, the uses that we're proposing, in our opinion, certainly are far more compatible to those residential uses than what could be built as of right in traditional industrial under the existing zoning for these lands. And I just want to say that we are willing to work with staff and with residents and with the Cache people as well, who we have spoken to about this, to try and deliver on a high quality development. One of the benefits of this particular site is its size and the ability through that development review process to make some changes to address some of the comments that residents have mentioned here. With regards to things like the provision of open space, connections, that sort of thing as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before I adjourn the public meeting, I just want to stress that no decision is going to be made tonight. And I'd like to thank the public for coming out, and your concerns have been heard. And I'm sure it'll factor into our decisions at some point in time. So thank you very much, and I adjourn the public meeting.
That one mine or yours? Pardon me? Okay.
Now's his chance to speak.
Okay. Councillor Taylor, did you want to, Councillor Taylor, did you want to make a comment? Okay. Over to you, sir.
Just through you, your worship, through your worship, excuse me, to Mr. Jones, if I could. There was a question that was asked about the development charges for the Hanson Bridge and what the taxpayers would pay versus what the development charges would pay. And I just thought it would be good, I know everybody's gone now, but if they're still watching on TV, just an understanding of what the taxpayer pays versus what development charges pay, and how much money is that bridge, and what is the situation for the financials for Orangeville, if we could.
Mr. Jones.
Through you, your worship, the short answer is that bridge will be paid for 100% by development charges. Similarly, the Hanson Boulevard connection from the bridge out to where it currently terminates, it's a collector road, so the oversizing of that road to a collector standard would be paid for by development charges, and the normal local-sized road portion would be paid for by the developer who needs it. So none of that road would be paid for by tax dollars either. All of it would be paid for by developers and development charges.
Thank you. So, councillors, we need a motion to receive both of the reports that were delivered during the statutory public meeting. May I have a motion? Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Post. Any comments? All in favor? Thank you. Okay, now we're moving on to item 12, staff reports. We have an end-of-year building permit report. Any comments from councillors on that? We have a motion to receive that report, please. Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? We also have a report on new businesses in Orangeville for the last quarter of 2019. May I have a motion to receive that report? Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? We also have a business retention and expansion initiative. Councillor Andrews, could you give us a little update on that, sir? That you were involved in this. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I am absolutely delighted through, of course, leadership of Mr. Osmond and his team, including Ruth Phillips. As was spoken earlier in the public consultation for a completely different issue, but an important one, which was referencing, of course, employment in our community. This particular document highlights the importance of business retention and expansion within our community. And this document, it does reflect the professional sector. This particular area is one of a couple that the BDAC and also, more importantly, the Economic Development Office is responsible in providing some additional information. But I, again, would just like to commend the staff for an exceptional document. It does provide a lot of information that not only can be used internally, but also externally, with hopefully the end result being the attraction of further investment in our community. This does justify a lot that has been spoken about. We do have a talented workforce that in many cases would like to work in our community. It does highlight some areas of concern. Again, there are employers in our community that are looking for skilled employees that are having difficulty in doing so. So it references that, but again, not to take too much time at the meeting tonight, but again, I just wanted to really reiterate the importance of this document, but also the great work that Mr. Osmond and his team, in particular Ms. Phillips and her staff, have done to present and provide this document to council and also members of our community.
Thank you. Could we have a motion from you to receive this
Absolutely.
report? From Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? 12.4, traffic calming. This is another report that staff has prepared. May I have a motion to receive that report? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Councillor Taylor. We want to have some commentary on this before we vote. Councillor Taylor.
No. Councillor Post.
Councillor Post.
Thank you.
Excuse
Thank you
me.
very much,
I'm
Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Jones, I think would be the most appropriate for this one. At our last council meeting, we spoke about hiring a consultant specifically to look at the intersection of Spencer and the bypass. Would it be appropriate to combine the request for proposal for a consultant with that? I see that your recommendation is to have another consultant hired. If we're issuing a request for proposal, is there an opportunity where we can combine the two requests and put it into one big motion at this point?
I'm sorry, Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Post, it's something that we could do, but they are very different studies. The investigation into the intersections on Riddell with Alder and Spencer is very much an engineering analysis, looking at what the traffic counts are, what the challenges are, what options there are, and what the implications of making changes would be. Traffic calming is more of a policy issue, and I think that it would require a more specialized consultant. There's not a lot of overlap between the two, and I think that we would probably be looking for two different consultants to do it. I think it would narrow the field for the first study if we wrap this piece in.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess to me, again, I've had some time to think about this since we were together last. It doesn't change what I have done or what council's done, but I just wanted to offer perspective. I think actually Councillor Peters was probably right in the way he voted last time, and that was, it was a 6-1 vote. Usually it's me on the one, but heck, nice of you to join us, Councillor Peters. But the idea was, why spend money on a consultant when there could be a foregone conclusion here? So I just want to play this out. If this goes down a path that, candidly the residents don't like, I'm still going to be pushing here to receive the outcome that I wanted a month ago. So anyway, we're down the path. I want to do what's right for the town. It shouldn't be just what's for the area, but I still don't feel great about what we're doing here. I would rather we have just addressed the issue 2 weeks ago with the intersections, and I think that's kind of what you were saying. You weren't necessarily in favor of going ahead, but you didn't want to spend the money on the consultant, which I understand. Now here we are, we're going to do something more holistic for the town, and I do agree with Mr. Jones that they're two different issues. But I guess I'm just very impatient with this whole process. I'd like us to get something done in more immediate fashion, and the waiting game when we come out, if it doesn't go the way, I think to quote Councillor Peters, doesn't go the way that the residents want it to go, we're still going to be back where we thought we were, right? So I certainly vote for this. I just kind of want to put that in council's ear. I don't think this is a very perfect process that we're endeavoring upon, and I don't know. I'm a little dissatisfied, but don't know what else to do about it at this point.
Well, I'll just weigh in. I think none of us on council here are traffic engineers. I mean, we understand there's potentially some issues on traffic safety. That's why we're reaching out to staff and to experts in that field. I feel that we need that information in order to move forward. Otherwise, we could be making a mistake, and I think we need to get, the advice of those who are expert in that field. So I'm certainly supportive of the spending of the money on traffic calming and on the Spencer Riddell review. So Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and to kind of piggyback a little bit about what you're talking about, this is a kind of a question to Mr. Jones, just to refresh my memory. Would this end up being included as part of a consultative review is the reduction in speed on some of our town roads. So again, not going through the entire community and not to spend too much time on this, but we have a number of our roads that are at 60K, 50K, and a few examples at 40. Would the process look at the reduction as part of maybe the review by the consultant or whatever the decision is by council?
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Andrews, the intent would be to hire a consultant to review traffic calming. There are a number of municipalities around that have traffic calming policies. I think that we would need to have a consultant take a look at what type of traffic calming measures would be appropriate for the town of Orangeville and under what circumstances different methods of traffic calming could be implemented. One of the things that we noted in the report is what is and what is not considered traffic calming. All-way stops where they're not justified in accordance with the OTM is not considered traffic calming. Reduced speed limits are not considered traffic calming. And part of the reason for this is because measures such as that are highly dependent on enforcement. People tend to speed if there's not a policeman around and they're able to do it. Where there are all-way stops and there's not enough traffic to truly warrant them, people tend to roll stop signs. While we were doing research to prepare this report to council, it was interesting to see the comment that oftentimes trying to implement reduced speed limits and all-way stops where they're not justified doesn't truly solve the problem and doesn't truly satisfy the residents who have a concern. I would suggest that Spencer Avenue is a good example of this. It wasn't that long ago that we reduced the speed limit. Had that been successful, I suggest that the residents may not have been back looking for all-way stops. Based on our research, traffic calming isn't adding all-way stops. This ultimately wouldn't perhaps solve the issue that the residents are looking to solve. Instead, taking a look at different traffic calming methods that might be used both in this area as well as elsewhere in town would provide us with different tools that could be used under different circumstances to satisfy the concerns of residents. But what I think is also critical in any kind of traffic calming policy is clear warrants, so that we can identify when traffic calming is truly warranted and when it is not. We run the risk if every time somebody asks for something, we give it to them, that we're going to be spending our entire capital budget on traffic calming. I think we need to have specific warrants that identify when something is required so that we can implement that and try and solve an existing problem. And when it's not, I think, again, it's important that we identify that it may not be something that is required under those circumstances.
Well, Mr. Jones, thank you very much for the clarity and the excellent response. Thank you.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. I just wanted to make my comments known. I'm very much in support of developing a traffic calming policy. However, I will not be supporting the ask of staff only because it is not in the 2020 capital budget. I would really like to see this come forward in 2021. Again, I'm not in favor of having another item. Here we are again, January. Second time in January, we're asking to dip into our reserves. So that is just my stand. We aren't exclusive to traffic calming problems. There are communities everywhere. And I would hope that, nothing would happen. But I think by waiting and having this go through the proper budget process, it would be what I would be supporting.
Okay, Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Jones, just again, if you could expand a little bit on what that report might entail. Is this sort of a report that would review solutions only, or would they be in various contexts? Are they going to look at specific neighborhoods or specific streets? Would public consultation be part of that process? Just wondering how hands-on the report and how specific it would be to Orangeville if someone's just going to reiterate what's in OTM or ITE, the engineering books, then we may not be getting anywhere, but hopefully you can elaborate.
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Peters, that's very much what we're looking to do. We're looking to hire a consultant who will have public meetings, who will listen to residents in town about what sorts of traffic calming they think are good, that are advisable, and what types are not. Certainly, council will be part of that consultation as well. I would hope that we could also include within the budget an analysis by them for some of the areas that have been identified, so that they could come up with suggestions for what would be appropriate traffic calming, if any, in some of those neighborhoods, so that that could be included in future budgets.
Thank you. Okay, so the recommendation that report ISTD 2020-04 traffic calming be received, and that council direct staff to issue a request for proposal for a consultant to develop a traffic calming policy for the town of Orangeville. So we had already Deputy Mayor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Taylor. Any further comment from councillors? Call the vote. All in favor? Against? Councillor Sherwood is against. Thank you. Moving on to 12.5, water and wastewater rate study. This recommendation includes that the council direct staff to proceed with option 2, which was the residential water conservation option, as the preferred rate structure in the water and wastewater rate study, and the council direct staff to prepare an update to the water and wastewater rates bylaw in accordance with option 2, residential water conservation rates structure. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I listened to Councillor Sherwood, and I agree. However, in my previous life, I was asked many times how many basement apartments are in town. And I used to say roughly 25% houses have basement apartments, and it's a coincidence that the 25% are the ones over the limit. I listened to Councillor Post talk about her large family, and she doesn't get close to using that level of water. So I would support option 2.
Very good. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple brief comments. I'll just pick up on the discussion at hand about the volumetric uses. We moved recently and now have a household of 6, have also never cracked the 20 cubic meters, so I'm definitely in support of that. And maybe not at this point, but at some point perhaps reducing that as citizens and businesses get better at conservation. That said, I was not entirely pleased at the recommendation to actually lower the volumetric rates and instead focusing on the base rate. I understand the economic argument that the consultant provided in terms of keeping capital and operating numbers balanced. That said, is the same in the energy world. Consumption is tied to billing. The less you charge, the more people will use, and I'm worried that the $1 a month or $2 a month that will be spent on the base rate will be compromised by several dollars of savings at the volumetric rate, and so you could have the same bill but actually higher consumption. That said, there's probably 1,000 iterations of how those numbers could change. They've obviously come up with one that's balanced economically, and that's going to win the argument for me, but I just thought I'd offer that perspective.
Right. Appreciate that. My own opinion is that town residents look at property taxes and water rates and hydro rates as a global conglomeration of taxation, and when I hear there's going to be a bit of a reduction, I'm supportive of it, particularly when we see the depth of the water and wastewater study, and it looks like we don't have infrastructure deficit. I know Treasurer Syed mentioned that during the budget presentation, that it seems to be a fairly strong reserve that we've got going, and as we all know, water and wastewater is on a cost recovery basis, so I like it. The other thing I want to ask Mr. Jones, the expenditure on capital in 2021 was, way above normal. Just if you could comment, does that include the Pullen Well conversion and startup, and is also our water meters, our higher technology water smart meters included in that of $6 million roughly in 2021?
Your worship, I believe that the Pullen Well is being funded primarily through development charges, not by water rates. Okay. I think that the large expenditure on water rates in 2021 and 2022 deals with the water meter changeout. And I believe that there's additional expenditures in wastewater that relate to a digester repair. And I'm seeing Ms. McGinnity nodding, so apparently I'm correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I guess I'll just reiterate my position based on the earlier presentation that I have concerns about the financial part of it, a little bit of a hardship on the average family, and because of that, I will not be supporting this. I know it'll probably lost, but the fact that the 10-year projected increase to the base amount is looking at 85%, and also with the threshold being reduced to a 20 per meter and only capturing 75% of our residents has got me concerned, because I think even if we had gone to 30, we might have been able to capture more than 75%, so I won't be supporting.
Okay, thank you. So 12.5, we need a motion on this item. Deputy Mayor McIntosh making a motion to accept this report and direct staff as per the recommendation. May I have a seconder? Councillor Taylor, any further comments? Okay, we'll call the vote. All in favor? And opposed? Councillor Sherwood is opposed. 12.6, we have a report. This is background information on McCannell Rolling Hills Drive intersection. A recommendation that the report ISTD 2020 regarding background information be received. May I have a motion? Councillor Peters, seconder on this. Councillor Post, any comments? All in favor? Opposed? No, all in favor. Unanimous, thank you. Okay, Councillor Sherwood.
I'm sorry, we're discussing.
Well, I guess we're finished 12.6.
Okay, I did have a comment regarding it.
So moving on to, did you want to make a comment? Sorry, on Councillor Sherwood, did you want to make a comment on something?
Okay, 12.6, yes.
Okay.
So we voted to
Receive the background information report. We haven't voted yet on
thank you.
a further motion. No. Councillor Taylor, do you wish to comment, sir?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to comment and note that the Robb family, who we're voting on this, is sitting in the back here and has been here all night. And I'd like to apologize because I didn't think we'd be this long, so unfortunately you're waiting. But I think it's important that council knows that who we're going to be speaking about is in the back of the room.
Good. Okay, moving on to 13, we have correspondence. This is Dufferin County Notice of Public Meeting regarding plan review and municipal comprehensive review. The recommendation that correspondence from Dufferin County be received. May I have a motion to receive this correspondence? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Thank you. Question period. Anybody from the audience would like to ask a question of council? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 15, which is the receipt of minutes of the following meetings: Business and Economic Development Advisory Committee, Committee of Adjustment, Heritage Orangeville, Orangeville Police Services Board, and the Orangeville Transit Task Force. May I have a motion to receive these minutes? Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? Thank you. Now, we're moving on to notices of motion prior to meeting. Councillor Sherwood has one. Councillor Sherwood, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, Your Worship. The motion is pretty self-explanatory. What I'm asking Council to support is that in the future budgets for the operating budget process, that we receive some historical trends. Therefore, asking that the operating budget in future presentations contain 2 years of audited actuals and an estimated year-to-date actual of the previous year. This would help us see where these trends go rather than budget percentage over previous year's budget.
Okay. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Sherwood, just had a quick question. Perhaps you could expand on it. To what depth would you envision this exercise? I mean, if we're talking every line item, are we tripling the workload? Are we looking just strictly at departmental? What magnitude of would you suggest in this exercise?
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, through you to Councillor Peters. I'm saying that how the budget was presented this year was great, and those, whether it be 20 items, would be what we would like to see some actuals for, audited actuals. So I'm not asking for detail of line by line, no. I just want an expansion on what we were currently presented, to have some actuals.
Do you have an example of, I'm just trying to, well, not even on that, but.
I could provide you with many municipalities that provide that in their budget presentations. Perhaps the treasurer would like to comment about.
Councillor Treasurer Syed.
Through your worship to Councillor Sherwood. So just for my understanding, you are looking for 2 years' worth of audited financial statements when you say 2 years audited actuals, because I believe our financial statements are already published online. So is that what you're looking for when you say 2 years of audited actuals? Just a clarification, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Sherwood.
Yeah, so basically if we take the current way that you presented the budget, which I say is no problem at all, what we were presented in the operating budget, I found myself that I couldn't approve or not approve or even challenge any of the items that were in the operating budget, because all we were given was, this is what was budgeted for 2019, this is what's proposed to be budgeted for 2020, but we don't know in the 2019 whether we're up or down. So what if we had 2018 actuals, audited actuals, we would have seen if we're within reason of those budgeted requests.
Right, so although that information is available, it would make it easier to compare during the budget process. Okay. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, sorry, just so I can wrap my head around it, Councillor Sherwood, you're talking about, say, the 2 or 3 summary pages that have the major line items at a division level. So I guess community services, compensation, or infrastructure services, capital projects, like at a fairly macro scale on the summary page. Is that the layer of information you'd want to see the comparisons for? Okay.
Okay, so this this motion says, therefore be resolved that staff, well, we're not going to vote on this today, are we? We are? Oh, okay. Pardon me, sorry. Now, therefore it be resolved, the staff include the following information as part of the operating budget package for council's review: 2 years of audited actuals and the estimated year-to-date actuals for the previous year. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Kind of piggybacking on what Councillor Peters was saying, I just have one question through you to the treasurer, which is looking at the proposal from Councillor Sherwood, what would be your estimated addition of work to be able to produce the report at the detail that is requested? Just, I want to make sure that it's a fair assessment of the budgeting process.
Madam Treasurer.
Through your worship, to Councillor Post, thank you very much for that question. Before I answer that question again, I go back to my original question to Councillor Sherwood. If you are looking for audited actuals, they are already represented through our financial statements. If you're looking to add additional columns to our budget document, for every line item that has been presented through our 2020 budget book, so to speak, then that will definitely create additional work. Just to provide a bit of a preamble, the industry standard, and I do look up to few cities and towns and municipalities, and I draw my inspiration, and that's how we presented our 2020 budget this year, or last year. So most of the towns or municipalities or cities that I look up to in terms of budget inspiration, they provide the format that we have adhered to, and that is quite consistent with what Town of Orangeville has done in the past. Budget is, and it's a sort of a strategic looking forward document. And yes, a trend analysis, looking at actuals do provide a little bit of information, but like I said, if you're looking at a 5-10-year projection of where you are going to be and what kind of financial pressure you're looking at, looking back 5 years or 10 years or even 2 years will provide you some information, but that shouldn't be the basis of making decision. Now, in addition to our audited financial statements, staff do bring variance analysis on a quarterly basis. That should in and of itself would provide council an additional layer of check and balance, so to speak, to figure out where your year-to-date variance numbers are. So I just wanted to provide that preamble and context to this particular motion. To answer your question more directly, Councillor Post, I would say adding 3 additional columns obviously would create some additional work. So I just want to make sure that that is what is the requirement of this motion is from Councillor Sherwood.
Right. Okay. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much. I definitely appreciate the thought behind the motion, and I'm definitely interested in seeing some actuals as well, but I am concerned about the level of work that's being requested at this point. And if we could, because some of that information does exist in other places, my suggestion would be that perhaps we just have the previous year's actuals listed in there rather than 2 previous years, and perhaps that would make it a little easier for the Treasury Department moving forward without adding too much work to the process. And I would be comfortable supporting that level. I think at what's requested right now, I think is going to be a little too much additional work for the benefit that I think we would see out of it. I think that we would get the most benefit out of having 1 year of actuals.
Okay. We have a motion. Councillor Sherwood has made a motion. I'm sorry, do you want to talk further to it?
So I will gladly amend the motion, if possible, to have 1 year of actuals so that we have it as a comparator for trends. Thank you.
Okay. We have a friendly amendment.
Can I just get clarification? Because currently it's worded as 2 years of audited actuals. Is that dropping and then we're going to the, just leave the estimated year-to-date actuals for the previous year? Or?
So I'm going to ask my fellow councillors to kind of give me their thoughts on the estimated year-to-date actual. When we were presented the budget for 2020, we obviously didn't know what the ending tallies were going to be from 2019. We were told by the treasurer multiple times that we're in a good position, but we didn't see it in paper. We didn't see anything to say, you know, the actual estimated end of the year for this particular department looks like it might come within budget, like within 1%. So that's what I was asking is, as we get to the 11th month of the year and the budgets are presented, we're pretty close at knowing how much we're going to wrap up the end of the year. Are they able to give us an estimate as to how we're looking in completing the actual budgeted amount by the end of the year. That's what I was meaning by that. Madam Treasurer?
Madam Treasurer.
Through your worship to Councillor Sherwood again, that's what the variance reports are for. And so when we bring variance reports before you, we have quarterly variance reports currently. And yes, I do appreciate the fact that we have moved up our budget process and timeline. So therefore, by the time we bring our first round of draft in front of you, we still probably have another quarter left of the year. But that's exactly what variance reports are supposed to do. When I was, when we were working on the first draft of 2020 budget, I believe, and if my memory serves me correctly, we did bring the third quarter around that time, the third quarter variance report for 2019. And again, that's the precise intent of a variance report, is to show council where you are in relation to your budget versus year-to-date numbers.
So I'm okay with dropping that off my motion,
Okay.
if I can get support for at least 1 year of actuals for comparative historical trends.
Okay. We have a seconder for
Sorry to make
that
it
amended motion. Councillor Taylor? All in favor? Okay. Very good. Thank you. Moving on, 16.2. This is safety concerns at Marshall Crescent. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Yes, thank you. I'll certainly support this motion. However, you know my feelings on rumble strips. I don't believe they're necessary. I would certainly support this if that was taken out. And as far as barricades, I truly believe one is needed. I would leave it up to Public Works to decide what type we need. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
I was prepared to defend it, but it looks like we're going to be good. So I'll speak to the barricades. Mr. Jones and I did have a discussion today about them, and they're basically things that you'd see in high school parking lots, essentially, with a wooden 4x4 or 6x6 post with a metal barrier, and it's about...
A guardrail.
Yeah, it's a guardrail. Yeah, about yay high off the ground, and that's what would be put in, and the rest of it reads as it is, and I would be fine with the friendly amendment of the rumble strips.
Mr. Jones, did we have a rough cost of these changes that were proposed? Sir.
Yes, Your Worship. The center line painting as well as the additional signage can be accommodated within the 2020 operating budget. We, of course, have a line painting budget that that this won't make a dent in, and we have a budget for signs that can accommodate that as well. The inclusion of the barricade, we do not have budget in. We're going to need to do some investigation and get this designed up properly to determine the height, the location, and the extent of the guide rail. I suggest it could cost upwards of $20,000 that we would need to tap into the general capital reserve to pay for.
Wow. 20 grand. You said this is 4x4s with some stamped metal, like typical guardrail?
Typical guardrail, Your Worship, but it does have to be built a certain way, and it needs to be designed up properly. It really goes to the length of it. Typically, a guide rail is not meant to be a barricade for head-on collisions. The intent is to protect vehicles and to guide them and to continue with them on the road. It's possible that we need to install this around the entire corner if we're going to be placing it there, in which case the extent of it can be would be fairly long. But that's why we need to secure some expert advice on this, as well as speak with our insurer to make sure that it's designed appropriately to minimize the likelihood of possible claims were there to be another collision with it at some point in the future.
Okay. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm very much in support of the roadway alignment signs, the checkerboard signs, planting some trees, painting the center line, because Mr. Jones has reassured me that we have that in the 2020 budget. However, I would like to see the suggestion of the guardrails, since it's going to come as a cost, and the ask is that it would have to be coming out of the general capital reserves. I don't support that now, but I would love to see that come in the 2021 operating budget or capital budget request. But I'm in full support of all the other signage because it falls within our budgeted amount for this year.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the hard work on the initiative and all the different recommendations. I'm behind almost everything. The rumble strips was already addressed. In general, I'm much more supportive of environmental design, and by that I don't mean energy efficiency and low carbon, but I mean sort of a natural state of things. And to me, the barricade and the expense that comes with it, if we start implementing platinum solutions to every potential safety issue that we have in this town, and we have numerous of them, not to take away from the one at this particular corner, because we know it exists. I think all the measures that have been proposed, including the trees, again, as a visual barrier and even slightly as a physical barrier, should do the trick. And I don't want to see the expenditures climb up exponentially as we start setting precedents for large-scale engineering solutions to each of the problems that we're faced with, because there are a lot. And I think some of that money needs to go towards the community-wide initiatives. And I think that we need to address the root cause, which is the people that are making these mistakes, and whether that's community outreach or education, or when we look at addressing this on a town-wide scale, any of these corners where people are operating their vehicles in a dangerous manner, that's the solution we really need to address. It's a much more difficult one, but it's something I think as a society we need to look seriously at.
Thank you. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much. I just want to respond to Councillor Peters first, and I appreciate your desire to just plant trees. However, I think it's important for everybody to note that the family in question has had their home hit 3 times in the last 13 years. Twice it actually struck the structure of their home, and the first time it actually took out the trees that were planted there the first time and did prevent them from hitting the home. The other thing that's important to note is that this family, as well as having those 3 incidents, can count numerous times, I would even hazard and say dozens, where people have missed that turn, come up behind their property and landed in the straightaway area, which doesn't impact their home, but where they've looked out the window and there's been a car in the backyard because it's missed the turn and gone through, and while it didn't take out the fence, it's still there. So Mr. Jones is exactly right that when we're looking at installing a guardrail there, it's to protect that entire property. We've got a family now in our community who can't sleep at night. They're concerned about their home, and I think that it goes beyond trees. And I definitely respect that position, but after sitting in the kitchen with them for an hour and hearing how concerned they are about the safety of their home and the safety of their family, I think that it's beyond that at this point, which is why we've addressed it the way that we did. I am comfortable removing the rumble strips piece, but I'm not comfortable removing the guardrail at this point.
Okay. My thoughts are, I like everything. I'm not in favor of the money being spent on the guardrail at this time. I think it can be included in a larger review of the town, and as Councillor Sherwood said, considered in the 2021 budget. So I will not be in favor of this motion as it's been presented. The removal of the rumble strips and the guardrail, I would support. So, do you wish to change this at all, this motion? Or do you, Councillor Post?
At this point, Councillor Taylor and I would like to proceed with the motion as written in the agenda, with the exception of the rumble strips. We're happy to remove those, but we would like to move ahead with the rest of the motion as presented.
Okay. We will call a vote on that then. I'm sorry?
I'm just going to ask for clarifications, because currently the motion, as noted, doesn't include the actual funding. I know that Mr. Jones' report did speak to the funding that was required, but however, that report was just received as information. So I'm just looking to Ms. Syed, just with respect to the need to include in the second bullet as it relates to the barricades that are being spoken of, that it should include that $20,000.
Additional $20,000.
$20,000 being
Right.
set aside from the capital reserve for that purpose.
Okay, so 2 amendments then. 1, removal of the rumble strips, and number 2, to add an additional cost of $20,000 for the guardrail. And is that correct? We're good? Okay, call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, so before we move along, do we want to amend your motion? Again, do you want to make another?
Can I just maybe make a suggestion?
Yes.
Perhaps maybe, I know we've taken a vote, but maybe you want to separate the vote and just go on each particular bullet, each recommendation?
I'm guessing that the guardrail is the issue?
Yes.
From
So
all
separate it
4
out.
of these. So, again, I'm going to put this to Councillor Post and Councillor Taylor. Do you wish to remove the guardrail for future consideration? Councillor Taylor.
I do appreciate council's support on this. I can tell you that as a councillor that's sitting in the kitchen of these people's homes and having to talk about their safety and the jeopardy and watching cars come around the corner, putting the guardrail there is the whole thing. The guardrail needs to be there. It can't, this isn't going to solve it unless we have the guardrail, because the car comes through.
The motion was defeated, sir. Do you wish to amend the motion?
I don't wish to amend the motion, no.
So
In the spirit of not letting it die, I mean,
I
would ask for council's support or guidance on how we can save this in some sort of way.
I'm just going to, my own personal opinion is signs were a significant issue there. I think what Mr. Jones's report said was going to identify the turn there, people coming up there in the dark, maybe a light not functioning properly and not hit that corner appropriately. And I think what has been suggested is appropriate. The trees are, but I mean, some of you know, I'm a realtor. A couple of years ago, one of my clients had a car go through their front window and land in their living room. I'm well aware of these issues, but that was an accident that happened. Accidents happen, and we can't be spending inordinate amounts of money on every incident that happens in this town. The person was charged with DUI, and I checked with traffic counts on McCannell, and since, I believe, about 5 years ago, there was another incident, is that correct? Since that time, there's been about 5.5 million cars go through that intersection and around that corner. So things happen sometimes. We got to do the best we can. I don't think we can spend this kind of money at this point without it being considered in a proper budget format. And I believe what has been proposed is adequate. And that's the way I'm voting. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. Just to keep this alive, can we pull out the barriers for now? However, when we get a price back from Mr. Jones, maybe have a re-vote on it? I'm not sure how that would go. Take some time to think about it. I don't know. Otherwise, it's going to be defeated.
Mr. Jones, correct me. I've got you, Councillor Post. You're going to do some investigation on what's the appropriate size of barrier here, what would you feel would work, and what the cost would be. Are you able to do that if we direct you so?
If I am directed so, I will absolutely do that, yes.
Okay. So, Councillor Post.
Okay, so again, in the spirit of keeping this alive and making sure that this family feels safe, perhaps what we could do is continue with the rest of the motion as written, minus the rumble strips. We can take out the barricade right now, but have the caveat that it'll be added into the 2021 budget.
For consideration. Correct. Right. Okay, so at this point, we're going to have another vote on removal of the guardrail. Part of this motion will be to direct Mr. Jones and staff to price out the guardrail as part of this motion. Sorry, Mr. Jones?
For clarity, Your Worship, that's something that would then be done as part of the 21 budget process. So it would come back as a draft project for council's consideration, and the costing would be done at that time, correct?
Did you anticipate this being done more expeditiously? Right, so, yeah. I'm in favor of hearing what the number is. I don't know what, I know Councillor Sherwood is opposed to that. She'd like to push it off for a few more months, but I'd like to hear it sooner than later. I think within 30 days or so, you should be able to come up with a number. Is that reasonable, Mr. Jones?
If that's council's wish, we can come up with something within that time frame. Yes.
Okay. All right, so Councillor Post and Councillor Taylor, would that suit you then to have this amended then and rumble strips removed, guardrail removed, but direct Mr. Jones to come back within 30 days with a cost on the barricade for us to consider? Correct. Well, to consider. At that point, depending on the value of it, Mr. Jones?
Sorry, not meaning to be difficult. The 30 days could be problematic. We have a council meeting on February 10th, and the reports are already past due for that date now. The one after that, I believe, is on March the 7th. It's into March. In any event, it's more than 30 days. Perhaps if we said prior to the end of March, that would...
Okay.
I
would be agreeable to that. And then once we hear that number, we'll be discussing it further in terms of how we would finance such a change. Okay, we all right with that? So, Madam Clerk, you've got that now? What the motion, the amended motion is?
I have it. So we're going to take a vote on one particular, like the motion as a whole in terms of the painting of the lines, giving direction to staff to price out and report back by the end of March with respect to the guardrail.
And excluding the rumble strip and the guardrail for now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything else is in.
Everything else in.
And directing the staff to.
Yep.
Okay. That's the motion. Call vote. All in favor? Okay. There we go. Thank you. 16.3, Councillor Peters. Do you wish to speak to this, sir?
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I broached it last time. Since then, I've learned that staff are preparing a reserve fund policy to help guide how those reserve funds are built and maintained and minimums and whatnot. The idea here was that we talked about the committee surplus from last year from Sustainability Orangeville, and the idea was to essentially earmark that for sustainability or environmental projects moving forward, rather than have it sort of lumped into a surplus and perhaps spent on other, I won't say non-environmental initiatives, but looking for projects that may be looking for that incremental cost to go to the next best solution, be it for energy, be it for transit, be it for parks, nature, that kind of thing. So as we go through budget processes in years to come, if the preferred solution from a sustainability perspective was an extra 5%, and we had a reserve fund that was slowly building to accommodate those types of decisions, this would be the genesis of that concept.
Okay. So, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, through you to Councillor Peters. So we currently do not carry any type of reserve for the sustainability. I guess if we don't use up all the funds, it just goes in the general surplus. So do you have any idea how much we're looking at opening up?
Councillor Peters.
Our surplus from last year, given that it was sort of an abridged year, the committee was only in existence for the 8 out of 12 months, we have $15,000 from that committee's budget to be placed in this reserve fund as a bit of a kickstart. And then ideally, we could have the discussion during future budget processes to chip into that the same way we would to capital projects or other reserve funds that come before us.
Your idea is to items be added or not just, or just add surpluses annually?
I'd like to explore the possibility. For now, this would just be establishing it and putting the funds from the previous year's committee into it, whether it was fed only by surpluses or by actual budgeted amounts and line items, we could discuss at a future date.
Very good. Okay, so this is a motion by Councillor Peters. Do you have a seconder for this? Councillor Andrews? Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Okay, 17, notice of motion. So let me talk to 17.1. Back, I think, 3-4 years ago, the town undertook a parking study on downtown. The consultant report was that there's not a downtown parking issue. I beg to differ. I've talked to many business owners in the downtown core, and many of them feel that there is a parking issue. We also were at the Roger Brooks presentation back in December 2018, where he was hired by the BIA to identify ways to improve our downtown core and create a destination retail area in our downtown core. And he made the recommendation that the parking lot between Mortgage Architect and the BVR would be a good place to put a parking structure. So there's been lots of discussion about this, but no direction, formal direction by council to staff. So what I would like to have ready for next meeting is a motion prepared, and I'll be talking to the town clerk and to the CAO about what the wording is on that. But that is a development opportunity across the road to create more parking with a mixed-use component of commercial retail and residential. So that's the idea. Hopefully we can have it laid out a little bit more clearly, but basically direct staff to move along that line, do some more research, probably have some consultation with the BIA and local businesses, but eventually put out a request for information or a request for proposal to developers to build something there with parking somewhere in the 250 or 300 unit parking in there. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. So you're not asking for another downtown parking study? Because, no. Okay, there was one presented to Town Council on March 17, 2017.
I'm aware of that.
Okay, no, I just wondered.
That's the one that says we don't have a parking problem.
Okay.
And I disagree. So and I think there's two things there. One is economic development, bringing more vitality to the downtown core and increasing the number of parking spaces so that people, when they come to our town, either tourists or from the West End, that they know they can get a parking spot. And that would hopefully encourage people to visit us and come to the downtown core and use our businesses and our shops downtown. Okay, that's that one. 17.2, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I wanted to just inform Council that this particular notice of motion will be rescinded and, in fact, represented at another date, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of context here very quickly, and I know it's very late in the evening. Mr. Osmond and I have had some preliminary discussion, and the intent of this is to provide some understanding of what e-scooters as well as LSVs are and the options that may be available to our community to make a decision. This is, in fact, a pilot that has been presented by the province of Ontario. All members of council have received some information, preliminary as it is. But one of the stipulations is, in fact, that municipalities have the ability to establish a bylaw regarding their usage. And I know that one of the local media outlets had indicated a story on e-scooters, and it's not necessarily the e-scooters that you see that look like a small little Vespa. This has in fact been implemented across numerous communities around the world. These are short distance electric vehicles that enable people to effectively travel from one end of the community, hopefully economically. But the LSVs also are an alternative method of getting from one part of the community to the other. So what the intent will be is to present, when time permits, an opportunity for an official notice of motion with a little more context to it, with the outcome being a bylaw investigation as well. The town clerk will be part of the discussion too, to see what the steps will be to effectively have this hopefully implemented at some point.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving along, 18, new business. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor, hang on, let me get rid of that. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I did not have the ability to get in touch with the clerk ahead of the meeting to present this notice of motion, but I'd like to also put forward a notice of motion for the next meeting that will be along the lines of requesting staff investigating the cost, feasibility, and funding options of installing a rainbow crosswalk at Mill Street and Broadway. I know we had discussed it previously, but I think at this point we need to make it formal so that it can go ahead and hopefully be implemented ahead of this year's Celebrate Your Awesome celebration.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Jones, did we not have a motion in the fall about this, and that we were asking you to come back in January so that we could implement something prior to and include in Celebrate Your Awesome? Mr. Jones.
You're correct. That was part of a larger motion that dealt with looking into options for crossing guards as well. There were several items that were included in the motion. I believe that was a part of it, yes.
And do we have, so this is duplication if I'm not mistaken, so do we have any kind of an update on that? And do we need to break it up here in order to get some sort of resolution on the rainbow crosswalk so we can try and implement it? Mr. Jones.
Certainly, if council wished to break it up, that would perhaps be a quicker and easier piece than the rest of it. Some progress is being made. There's a number of priorities that are being set for the department as we go, and you know, we're trying to move through them as quickly as we can.
Okay. All right. So I don't think so. I think they're working on it. I think we have reminded the department, and although there's no timeline at this point, Mr. Jones?
Not at this point, no, sir.
Okay. All right. So we'll keep pushing, Councillor Post. We have a motion already in the department, I think. Sorry, was there any other further comment or new business? Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just under new business, for anybody watching, there's a bit of an outreach campaign going on right now in town to recruit members for the Communities in Bloom Committee. We've been participating in this program for several years at a very high level, very successfully, but there is a need for some volunteers and some community members to step up and help out with the initiative. So there'll be a preliminary meeting in February for those interested, and in the meantime, there's some campaigns online to drum up interest.
Yes, this has been very successful, and Orangeville should be very proud of the awards that have been won, including some national awards. So hopefully we can get some additional help on that committee. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, we all know how important festivals are in our community, and I just wanted to make the public aware that the Orangeville Blues and Jazz are hosting a fundraising event here at our beautiful Opera House next Friday, February 7th, featuring Stone Free, which is a tribute to Jimi Hendrix. So I encourage everyone to get their tickets and enjoy a show, and at the same time help support a great cause.
Right, and that date, do you know? February 7th, okay. And tickets can be purchased here at the box office at Theatre Orangeville. So, yeah, we want to support our good friends at Orangeville Blues and Jazz Festival. Any other new business, councillors? Seeing none, we'll move on to bylaws. So we have a recommendation that the bylaws listed below be read 3 times and passed, and they include a bylaw to repeal bylaws regulating smoking, a bylaw to repeal a bylaw under the Building Code Act respecting permits and related matters, a bylaw to repeal bylaw 11896, being a bylaw to establish and maintain a system for the management of solid waste, and to repeal bylaw 7373 and 1089, and a bylaw to repeal bylaw 396, being a bylaw to require the installation of carbon monoxide detectors in all new residential dwellings and commercial units, and a bylaw to confirm the proceeding of today's meeting of the Corporation of the Town of Orangeville, regular council meeting on January 7th, 2020, January 27th, 2020. May I have a motion to pass those bylaws? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, second by Councillor Andrews, all in favor? May I have a motion to adjourn? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, Councillor Taylor, all in favor? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.